This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10. Do you fancy playing a little game? The way you ask a question can be fascinating, can't it? Because I was just thinking, we're going to ask you in a minute, particularly if you are stuck on an NHS waiting list. I was going to ask you who you hold responsible, the government or the doctors, the medics, let's say, to broaden it out somewhat. And then it occurred to me that actually, I'll tell you when it occurred to me, reading all this bilge about 100,000 people coming here under Keir Starmer's probably doomed plan to set up some sort of returns agreement with the EU. It just occurred to me that these people in government and all the client journalists who recycle their garbage unchallenged, they're going to be staggered when they find out who's been in charge for the last 13 years, aren't they? There's some massive wake-up calls coming for 80% of Fleet Street and a lot of people who do my job for a living, when they find out who's been in charge for the last 13 years, but who's been cheerleading for them at pretty much every turn. And then you just have a little look around at the state of the nation and wonder who's responsible. Rishi Sunak effectively today saying, well, if it wasn't for those pesky medics, I would have brought waiting lists down. But that's not the game. The game was this. So I could say to you, who do you hold responsible for languishing? I would use that word correctly. Who do you hold responsible for your or your loved one languishing on an NHS waiting list? Do you hold responsible the people who have been in charge of the NHS for the last 13 years or the doctors? Right? And that is a question loaded to lead you in a certain direction. And then I could ask it like this. I could say, who do you hold responsible for you or your loved one languishing on an NHS waiting list? Is it the politicians desperately trying to make diminished budgets and a growing population go further? Or is it the doctors who can't even be bothered to turn up for work because they're striking for even more pay? I could phrase it like that, right? And you'd go, or you could potentially be led in a slightly different direction. Then you could do it, I suppose, double bubble, maximum provocation. Who do you hold responsible for the fact that you or your loved one is languishing on an NHS waiting list? Is it the politicians who've been in charge of the NHS for 13 years, or is it the medics that are so committed to patient care that they keep going on strike? And then I could go completely neutral and simply say, who do you hold responsible for the fact that you or a loved one are languishing on an NHS waiting list? The government or the doctors? The government or the medics? 03456060973. It's how you do it, isn't it? Isn't it interesting? And of course, because the media landscape is so completely corrupted now in this country, Rishi Sunak can kind of get away with trying to wash his hands of all responsibility. And it doesn't just go back to his premiership. Go back to the beginning of austerity, when they just sucked billions of pounds out of the NHS. What's crucial about this, and you need to look at the inimitable John Byrne Murdoch's work at the Financial Times on what funding is and what funding does. Because with their client media, they will say to you, we're putting more money than ever before in the NHS, which might technically be true, but the amount in real terms, in percentage terms, is the lowest, has been for years, the lowest it has ever been. And what that does, I needed someone to explain this to me, because I fell for it. I have to say, well, they're putting more money in than ever before. What that does is deprive trusts of spending money on what you might describe as long-term investment. So at its simplest, beds and equipment, which would actually shorten the amount of time that people spend in hospital. So the more beds you've got and the more equipment you've got, the less time patients will generally spend in hospital. The more people you can treat and the less time they will spend in hospital. So what we've had for 13 years is successive governments dedicated to curtailing spending on what you might describe as long-term or infrastructural investment. And of course, because we've allowed depraved liars like Boris Johnson to rise to the highest offices in the land, they not only trim the spending, they not only cut the spending, particularly on these crucial infrastructural areas, but they simultaneously claim that they're doing the exact opposite. So it's as if he's picking your pocket with one hand and tweaking your nose with the other. And you then shake him by the hand and say thank you. Because all this bilge about building 40 new hospitals, which even if it had been close to the truth, wouldn't have been the truth, because a lot of them, of course, were what we would describe as a refurbishment. You get a new kitchen. We're having some building work done at the moment. You come home when it's finished and say, oh, look, we've got a new house. Well, no, you haven't. You've got the same house. You've just tarted up the kitchen a bit. But in Boris Johnson's glorious rule, that's a new house. Seriously, probably a lick of paint. I changed the carpet on the stairs. We've got a new house. Look, we've got a lovely new house. You haven't got a new house. You've got a new carpet, you silly old sausages. So those three things going on at the same time. The blatant lies, which I think are in a form of retreat. I think Sunak just hasn't got I don't know quite what you'd call it, the front, I suppose. Hasn't got the front to look you in the eye and tell you that it's raining when you're suffering from heat stroke. You've got the blatant lies possibly in retreat. You've got the passing of the buck now. It's almost our national sport, isn't it? Politicians blaming anyone but themselves. Blaming it on the sunshine, the moonlight, the boogie. And now Rishi Sunak essentially seeking to blame waiting lists on doctors and nurses, as if we're too thick to notice that the waiting lists were enormous before any industrial action began. And one of the reasons why doctors and nurses continue to take industrial action is to highlight the fact that the NHS is being run into the ground and they're not able to do their jobs to the degree that they would like to. Problems with recruitment and retention are intimately related to pay and remuneration. You can't improve recruitment and retention if people are unhappy with the terms of employment. And when, again, you crunch the numbers, you will learn that in what they like to call real terms, medics' pay has gone down. Oh, here's an article in the Daily Mail showing that they get paid more than doctors in, Andorra. So what? I'm interested in what they get now compared to what they got in 2010. In real terms, in a cost of living crisis, in a country where the health service needs to improve recruitment and retention. I should probably provide you with a warning on this. I'm going to play you a couple of clips of Rishi Sunak, and then I'm probably going to come up with some sort of question that seeks to recognise the invitations to bias that I highlighted a moment ago. But I think at the heart of it will be, how stupid does he think you are to fall for this? The idea that these waiting lists are the fault of the doctors and nurses toiling daily to reduce them. It's madness. But you are, I've already spoilt it, haven't I? I've already displayed where my evidence-based preconceptions lie. You may challenge it. You may think that it's entirely the fault of the doctors and nurses. But probably you might find someone who can blame it all on Gordon Brown, shall we? 13 years, Tories in power, but I blame Labour. That would be an early contender for Idiot's Corner. Have a little listen to Sunak making the original pledge for reasons that I still don't fully understand back in January.
NHS waiting lists will fall and people will get the care they need more quickly. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not. No tricks, no ambiguity.
This is 7.7 million people today. That's where we are. That translates to roughly 1 in 7 people in England waiting for treatment. I think, I know I overused the boiled frog analogy, but it's hard to think of a better example of it, isn't it? My A to Z theory. If you went from A to Z in one move, there'd be riots on the street. But if you go through the other 24 letters before you get from A to Z, B, C, D, E and the rest of them, then actually it goes unremarked, or we accept it, we put up with it. If you went from 2010 when patient satisfaction in the NHS was at the highest it has ever been, and then you woke up the next morning and there were 7.7 million people waiting for treatment in England, there'd be a blooming revolution of some kind. And yet, because it's happened incrementally over 13 years, we sit here now and we go, oh, it's gone up a bit, has it? It was the figure 1 in 7 that stopped me in my tracks. I thought a colleague had made a mistake. It can't be 1 in 7. 1 in 7 people waiting for treatment in England. People would be marching. They'd be marching on Westminster. Unless, of course, they listen to Rishi Sunak, in which case they'd be marching on the hospitals and blaming all the doctors and nurses. It's quite breathtaking. 13 minutes after 10 is the time. Here he is last month on LBC trying to blame the strikes on the doctors and nurses.
All these other unions and millions of public sector workers, including the NHS, have accepted it. Now, there are a few exceptions, including junior doctors and consultants. That's what's causing the waiting list to go up. I don't think that's right. I would say to them, I'm very grateful and respectful of the incredible job you do, but we all have a shared mission to bring the waiting list down.
So I'm going to play that to you again because I want you to just notice something. What he's effectively saying is, and the Royal College of Nursing was cut out of a round table yesterday with the Health Secretary Steve Barclay. But what I particularly love about this mealy-mouthed little mule is MEWL, is the way that he's essentially saying, well, we've sorted it all out. It's only all the doctors that haven't started dancing to our tune. It's only all the doctors. You're talking about NHS waiting lists. Well, it's all going brilliantly. There's just one tiny little problem. All the doctors. I'm not imagining that, am I? Have a listen.
All these other unions and millions of public sector workers, including the NHS, have accepted it. Now, there are a few exceptions, including junior doctors and consultants.
Junior doctors
that's
and
what's causing
consultants.
The waiting list to go up. I don't think that's right.
That's all the doctors.
I'm very grateful and
that's all
respectful
the doctors.
Of the incredible
He's the
job
Prime
you do,
Minister.
but we all have a shared mission to bring the waiting list down.
Right. Yeah, so you'd be bringing the waiting lists down, would you, pal, if it wasn't for checks notes. I don't do that very often because it's such a lazy little gag, but sometimes it really works. In fact, I'll even do a sound effect. Checks notes. All the doctors! All of them! Every single doctor! Listen to it again, just to clarify that I'm not going bonkers.
All these other unions and millions of public sector workers, including the NHS, have accepted it. Now, there are a few exceptions, including junior doctors and consultants. That's what's causing the waiting list to go up. I don't think that's right. I would say to them, I'm very grateful and respectful of the incredible job you do, but we all have a shared mission to bring the waiting list down.
Go on then. That is absolutely incredible. I didn't notice that at the time. That's absolutely breathtaking. So what's that, Prime Minister? You're getting, everyone's got their shoulder to the wheel, except all the doctors. All of them. Every single one. There are no doctors left, are there? If you've got the junior doctors and the consult, that's everybody, I think, pretty much. I can't believe my ears some days, and I do this for a living. So, what's the question then? It is, I suppose, possible that you blame somebody else for the 13 years of Tory rule. I'd be fascinated to hear who. 0345 60973. How does he think he'll get away with it? It's actually a slightly more nuanced question than it initially appears. I was looking yesterday at the ludicrous claims they're making about immigration, and I thought, well, they will get away with this. They'll put it out there, this 100,000 figure, which Rishi Sunak has pulled out of his hat. It will, because it will be repeated by the Telegraph and by the Times and by the Sun and by the Mail and by the Express and by some broadcasters. It will be repeated. It doesn't matter how many times Yvette Cooper turns up with a calculator and says it's absolute garbage. Some people will choose to believe it because they have their scarf, even after 13 years, tied so tightly around their neck. Their bright blue scarf, it has cut off the flow of blood to what passes for their brain. But when Rishi Sunak comes forward and talks about waiting lists being at phenomenal levels, months after promising that he would bring them down, and then seeks to... It's been growing for much of the last decade. But before that, they were falling. So you've got 3 million in 2014, 4 million in 2017. It's like that Fast Show sketch, not Fast Show. It's like the Day-to-Day sketch, isn't it? When Steve Coogan played the swimming pool attendant. In 1984, nobody died. In 1985, nobody died. So in 2014, there wasn't a strike, and there were 3 million on the waiting list. In 2017, there wasn't a strike, and there were 4 million on the waiting list. In 2021, the doctors weren't on strike, and there were 5 million on the waiting list. In 2022, I don't think there were strikes last year, were there? There were 7 million on the waiting list. In 2023, there are doctors striking occasionally, sporadically, and there's 7.7 million people on the waiting list. So that proves the waiting lists must be the fault of the doctors. That's not... he's supposed... Good God, if he'd done sums like that when he worked at Goldman Sachs, he'd have been sent to jail. Because we live in a country where playing fast and loose with money is considered to be a much more heinous crime than playing fast and loose with people. with people's lives, with people's health. Let's have a look at the Grenfell Tower story, if you'd like an illustration of where that kind of ideology can lead. So how does he possibly imagine that he could get away with blaming doctors for the waiting list? That is a genuine question I would like you to answer. 0345 6060 973. A couple of you pointing out that it's a shame they can't blame it on the EU anymore, because if they could, they would. And the second question is this. I want to get this one right, because the usual tricks aren't quite working. They will be for some sort of mutton heads. Of course they will. But the usual tricks aren't working. And what I want to know is, from people on the waiting lists, and I've got a terrible personal experience of this, someone we know, diagnosed with epilepsy, actual epilepsy, after having a seizure, and can't get seen until January. So go to A&E, get diagnosed effectively, have the tests you need for the diagnosis, but for the treatment, for the drugs, for the advice on how to handle this life-changing diagnosis, no appointments available until January of 2024. That's a waiting list, right? If you're in that situation, just tell me. I'm not going to do it binary. I'm not going to say who do you blame, because that's silly. That opens up the possibility that it's not the fault of the government. I want you to tell me how it makes you feel to hear the Prime Minister try to blame the doctors who will treat you for the waiting lists that he has created. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And Robin Leeds has pointed out it's obviously not all the doctors, James. Dr. Dre and Dr. Pepper have absolutely nothing to answer for. It's a very good point. I stand corrected.
James O'Brien on LBC.
You know, if they put the graph showing NHS waiting lists on the front page of newspapers as often as they put pictures of refugees in dinghies, I don't think anyone would ever vote Tory again. Just the very simple plotting from 1997, when waiting lists had been, up until which point waiting lists had been rising for a very long time, and then they plummet until 2010, at which point they start rising again, until 2020, when they go off the charts. If they put that graph on front and centre as often as they put pictures of refugees in dinghies, the country would be a very different place. Anyway, enough from me for now. Have I ever kept that promise, Keith? I'm not sure I have, but anyway, there's a first time for everything. Rajdev's in Twickenham. Rajdev, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I was going to say, I was trying to answer your question. I was finding it difficult because I can't believe that anybody in this country will believe what Rishi Sunak is saying about the NHS. I can't believe
there are
anyone.
Entire television stations dedicated to believing what Rishi Sunak says, regardless of whether it's the NHS, the imminent arrival of unicorns, or the myriad benefits of Brexit, Rajdev, not to mention countless newspapers. But I take your point.
No, and you made a point before that he's no Boris Johnson, and I think Boris Johnson could have pulled that off. And he has
the scale of the lie.
Yeah, absolutely. He's shown he can do it, but Rishi Sunak is not in the same league as Boris Johnson. He's not got that ability to pull that sort of a barefaced lie.
This is technically a compliment, you realise.
Well, yes, but I mean, but in terms
what a state we're in, eh?
But in terms of getting elected, he's not on the level of Boris Johnson. Is my point. I mean, Boris Johnson could win an election, just making up a whole lot of rubbish, which he's proven. But I don't see Rishi Sunak doing that. So I don't understand the tactic then of doing that, because it's not going to benefit him. I think Rishi Sunak should really become more honest about things and say, look, I made a mistake about the pledge. The pledge I made was unachievable, frankly, in this day and age. The problems of the NHS are more, they are endemic. I used to work in the NHS a number of years ago. Yeah. I saw the same sort of problems then as I do now.
But you didn't see the same sort of waiting lists, mate.
No, well, exactly. But fundamentally, the problems haven't changed. Just the effects of them have mushroomed. And also the other factors as well. The widening aging population, the widening scope of the NHS, and the people leaving it in droves.
But I think that's crucial, isn't it? Retention absolutely. And recruitment are probably the two single most important factors facing people genuinely dedicated to reducing these waiting lists, and Rishi Sunak just puts his fingers in his ears on the subject.
Yeah, but what's depressing for me is if I look at Labour's strategy, I don't see that there's any solution to what they're offering either, and I don't think anybody on either party has got a handle on what the NHS needs.
You may well be right. All I can do is point you to the record, and the record shows absolutely clearly that under Labour, the waiting list went down from 18 months to 18 weeks.
Well, yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
The average waiting time. So, I mean, unless someone breaks the seal soon and comes out with a commitment to raising more money through taxation, you're probably right. We're going to be in a death cycle of repetition and regurgitation. But I don't quite get this refrain. Like, what would Labour do differently when the general election is still over 12 months away and the policy pronouncements are now coming on an almost weekly basis? But I take your point, Rajdev. I do. 26 minutes after 10 is the time. Simon's in Bristol. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Just very quickly, I've got a 15-year-old son.
Yeah.
Who unfortunately in February ruptured his cruciate ligament on his knee.
Okay.
So he's currently in the list, pot.
What does he need? Forgive me, I don't know what the treatment would be.
Sorry.
So I don't apologise.
He needs an operation. He needs a knee operation.
Right.
And it puts him out for 12 to 14 months after for recovery time. So from the moment his knee is physically fixed by the surgeons, he's out for another 12 months.
Right.
So he's going to miss in the region of 2 years worth of rugby. That's his sport.
Yeah.
It's critical to his socialisation. It's critical to his mental health. It is what he lives for as a sports. Sports teams are great because people socialise in them.
Yes, of course, I understand.
I was just saying to your producer or researcher, that every time now he asks us when is it going to happen, and he's a resilient little thing. He's quite mature, and we have to say to him that sorry, we don't know. You can just see another chink in the armour coming.
I understand that. So what are you're waiting for a date, are you? Just like waiting for the postman every day? You've rung them up. What do they say?
So this week we've had an interesting ding-dong.
Go on.
They won't give you a date, and they claim that they can. And I've actually had something as an email, not blaming the strikes,
right,
but certainly using it as leverage as to why they can't see him sooner.
Sure.
And this is from within sort of the NHS.
Yes.
They've explored you can refer to whatever hospital you want,
right,
sort of route, and they've got private support in the local area. But none of the private companies will touch children because they don't want the risk.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I mean, this is one of those things that you know nothing about until you know everything, isn't it? If your lad hadn't busted his knee, you'd be listening to the radio today. You may even have switched over and listened to some funky tunes. You'd be like, oh, that sounds bad, but I've been waiting list. I've got a waiting list coming out my ears. We've been talking about this for 13 years. And then suddenly it's one of the most important things that's happening in your life. And you can't quite get your head around how bad it is, right?
No, and like before I come on air, I was saying, how does it make me feel? Well, obviously he feels down and just destroyed by it all.
Yes.
We've got GCSE starting in December, so he's got a lot of plates to spend. The whole scenario just makes me angry as a parent because I'm helpless, completely stranded, with nowhere to go.
Yeah, and you are. I mean, normally at this point I like to come out with some soothing words, but I can't think of anything to say to you. You can't get a date, and it happened in February, and you can't. Nope. So it's been diagnosed, but but you're waiting for an operation, and you can't get a date for your operation.
Correct, and I sit here and listen to yourself, Sheila, and all the other,
fools,
middle outlets,
idiots.
Well, don't be too harsh, but. And I listen to this bloke who has got no moral accountability, no moral backbone, no physical backbone, no leadership skills, lead the country, and blame everybody else for
everyone but himself. So
I would say he's failing, but his party's failing.
I'll tell you what it is. So listen, as that letter you refer to mentions and makes clear, obviously doctors taking industrial action is going to contribute to a problem. But it is a bit like one sprinkle on a cake, hundreds and thousands. So he's blaming the cake on the state of the cake on one sprinkle. And none of the sponge, none of the icing, none of the topping, none of the other sprinkles, none of the candles, none of the cream filling. He's blaming it on a sprinkle. Thank you, Simon. Try not to be hard on yourself because, everyone else would be in pretty much the same boat as you if their child had suffered the same thing that you suffer. That your boy has suffered. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
A man has died after an attack involving 2 dogs in the West Midlands. A 30-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of having dogs dangerously out of control in the village of Stonnell. Thousands of jobs could be under threat at the UK's biggest steelworks. Unions have warned a state aid deal to move from coal to electricity at Port Talbot could lead to around 3,000 job losses. 3 people are due in court in Surrey charged with the murder of Sarah Sharif. They returned to the UK from Pakistan on Wednesday. LBC weather, fine and dry across much of England and Wales. Rain in central and northern areas, a high of 25 degrees.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10:34 is the time. I mean, I do this occasionally. I don't know whether it's because it's the end of the week, it's a Friday, and I'm feeling a little bit tired. But sometimes a clip. The one yesterday we should play again as well. Can we get that one again from yesterday? That Theresa May one. They just sort of slap me around the back of the head like a wet fish sometimes. And when Sunak tried to blame the waiting lists on the doctors, completely ignoring the fact that they've been going up exponentially since 2010. This little bit here where he essentially says, well, I would have fixed it. If it wasn't for all the doctors, is pretty much a wonderful illustration, actually, of just how sycophantic in many ways our media has become.
All these other unions and millions of public sector workers, including the NHS, have accepted it. Now, there are a few exceptions, including junior doctors and consultants. That's what's causing the waiting list to go up. I don't think that's right. I would say to them, I'm very grateful and respectful of the incredible job you do, but we all have a shared mission to bring the waiting list down.
So if it's doctors taking industrial action that's causing the waiting list to go up, why did they go up in 2010 and 2011 and 2012 and 2013 and 2014 and 2015 and 2016 and 2017? Can you see where I'm going with this? And 2018 and 2019 and 2020 and 2021 and 2022. And when you think of it in those terms, the question of how the hell he thinks he can get away with this is actually worth asking. Jenny's in Blackpool. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James.
Hello, Jenny.
Excuse my nerves. I'm under a different name as I'm both a patient waiting for an operation that hopefully will help me breathe more easily.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My thyroid gland is just growing and growing. I've managed to find a bench whilst walking the dog so I can talk rather than walk and talk. I find that difficult.
I'm sorry.
And my husband's a consultant surgeon and I'm a medical secretary. I can see it from all sides, and certainly the funding, the government is the huge issue, as you say. It's year on year issues. Now we're having waiting times in A&E that we'd occasionally see at winter time. Kind of 5-10 years ago.
Yes.
It'd be the exception to the rule at winter. Now it's like in the summer there's waiting times in A&E that are astronomical. And it's down to lack of staff, as you say, recruitment, retention. There's so many issues. And you asked the question, how does it make me feel?
Yes.
Sorry, emotional.
No, you do take your time.
Going from absolute anger to, I suppose, sadness to fear for, my father-in-law recently died. He had wonderful care in the community, but in the hospital it was shocking because hardly any staff. And I just feel for everyone out there waiting for their operations, because we have patients coming to us, medical secretary in the private and NHS, and especially the older patients that have more complex health needs. The private hospitals do not deem that them safe to be operated on in their hospitals. So they come to us saying, I've been told I've got to wait 2 to 3 years for this particular operation. Can I pay privately? And where they're saying, well, we'll get the pre-assessment team to assess you. And of course, they're too much of a health risk for the private hospital setting. So back to the NHS they go. And people don't understand that, it's all very well kind of, getting minor operations done and procedures and, checkups. Only yesterday I was taking my daughter to have a breast scan because, just couldn't see the GP, and she's off to uni soon. And Anyway, sorry.
No, don't ever apologise, Jenny.
I think it's a drip feed effect, though.
Well, it's death by 1,000 cuts, isn't it, to coin a phrase?
Yeah, it's just like the, kind of blaming everything on the EU, as you say. But let's start kind of by really kind of making the public turn against the professions in the NHS.
Yeah.
Let's face it, they don't go into it for the money. Yes, of course, money is you need it to survive, but
sure.
They've got altruistic natures. They want to help people. You can't just pick any Tom, Dick and Harry off the street and say, go and care for Auntie Doris down the road in the community and do intimate care. Oh my goodness! Sorry.
Well, let me steer you. Just then, a quick word on your reaction to the sight or the sound of a Prime Minister blaming it all on people like your husband.
Oh. When I heard that, honestly, I'm so glad everyone was out of the house at the time. Honestly, my husband leaves work at 5:45 every morning,
yes.
Comes back, 10 at night, and it's a number of things. He's got 3 or 4 jobs trying to just, could have obviously get money coming in,
yes.
but also looking out for patients. I mean, one of the things is working on a plan. I think it's since been shelved. He put a business case forward a few years ago of trying to buy a laser in.
Yeah.
This is an example of efficiency, etc., that they usually hire. And the hiring costs, versus buying it, yes, as an initial outlay, the hiring costs far outweighed the actual if you bought
They'll buy it 10 times over, won't they?
Yes, and that was shelved because, we can't, could afford to get that now. And
well, that's what I was trying to.
So many efficiencies to be made. Don't get me wrong; it's not a perfect service, but I do feel from the stress on my husband. I find it increasingly difficult to breathe and therefore want the operation. But obviously when you're told, we've got to put a child with cancer on the list instead of you, of course you're going to let that happen. But
I hear you. I do. My mum has been a slave to her thyroid for years, so I have some inkling of the trials and tribulations that you face. But presumably, on top of the symptoms, the uncertainty must be very draining as well, Jenny.
Yes, but at least I'm not in pain.
Yes,
like there are a number of people out there, and on
we go. I thank you, and thank you also.
Lovely to speak to you, James.
It's a genuine pleasure to speak to you as well, and I do wish you all the best, obviously. But I'm particularly grateful for the illustration of what I was trying to convey about the difference between spending and investment, and I think Jenny just nailed it with that laser. So you're spending more money than ever before, for example, on renting a laser. If you were investing, you would be buying the laser, which would mean this month you spent more on lasers than you currently do, but for the next 50 months you would be spending a lot less. Speaking of strikes, train drivers are out again on September the 30th and October the 4th. Some breaking news for you, coinciding with the Conservative Party annual conference. Of course, until helicopter pilots go out on strike, Rishi Sunak's travel plans will presumably be unaffected. This is part of their long-running dispute over pay. Again, recruitment and retention being crucial to the ASLEF union's vision of the future of the railway. So just start the stop watch now for Rishi Sunak blaming it all on striking railway workers rather than decades of, or at least decades of post-privatisation decline. Tamsin is in Tavistock. Back to the NHS. Tamsin, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Sorry, excuse the nerves.
It's only me.
I feel like a bit of a broken record, to be honest.
Well, don't be like that. Seriously, all the stories matter. So, these are all our lives, aren't they? They matter. They couldn't matter more.
So my son is 5, nearly 6 now,
right.
And has epilepsy. He has been on the surgery pathway now for nearly 3 years.
Okay.
From when it was kind of first mentioned, and you'll see a neurologist to talk about surgery, etc. So I try to keep it concise because it's just Banhausen.
Of course.
And anyway, it's just wait. It's every stage has been waiting. So every pre-surgical assessment, it's been months and months, to get this test and this test and this test, and kind of finally got to the point where we thought we'd had everything we needed to do, and we're kind of waiting for surgery. And we met up with his neurosurgery team back in April.
Right.
They're as kind of disheartened as well, more.
We should probably take a moment to reflect on how dismal and draining this must be for the professionals, even before the Prime Minister tries to blame them for the problems that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they've all got quite a, I think just to survive, they have to have kind of a, dark sense of humour, and they were kind of like, we all went to go and get jobs at Costa, but they didn't want to, kind of thing. And we were like, please don't leave. So my friend's actually, she's a neurosurgeon, although not in peds.
Right.
And she's having to kind of literally go into work every day. I don't think she'd mind me saying, going into work every day and literally fighting for a bed for her patients.
Yeah.
So she kind of, she said, I'm all set up to do surgery, and then I spend an hour in the morning fighting to get a bed to even do the surgery, and then I have to get myself back in that headspace.
To do the surgery.
Yeah, and repeatedly, all the while being told that the sooner he has, so they want to reset the part of his brain, obviously, that's causing the seizures.
Right.
To hopefully give him seizure freedom, or at least reduce them.
Yeah.
And all the while being told, that the sooner he has this done, the better the outcome.
Tamsin, I'm so sorry.
The more seizures he has, the more damage is effectively being done to his IQ, and and then on the other side of that, there's no help from the local authority are backed up. So he really needs an EHCP, which is something that will help him in school.
Yes.
And that's an 8-month wait list for an educational psychologist to come and assess him. And we've looked at private routes. They won't accept those.
Right.
In terms of private peds neurosurgery, if we could sell everything we owned, but it just doesn't exist in the UK
for the reasons that Jenny alluded to, because it's not an attractive business proposition for the private sector hospitals.
Yeah, so we've gone down the MP route. They can't help. We've contacted Steve Barclay. We've got the same automated response of, we're ploughing a load of money into NHS, blah blah blah. There is just we've hit every brick wall.
And do you have an inkling of when the operation?
So when we met back up with them. So we met with him in April.
Yes.
So he has to have a pre-surgery surgery, if that makes any sense.
Of course it does.
So they need to do further testing, which is when they put probes into his brain, basically. Right. They said they were thinking that could be done maybe in the new year.
Right.
I spoke with the secretary the other day, and she said, unfortunately, their head technician retired back in, I think it was June, and they've only just got another one. So I have absolutely no idea
when it's going to. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And you are clearly a mum who is, out there every day trying to do the best for your boy. There'll be some children who don't have the level of advocacy that your son has, but it's not really doing you much good, is it? Even.
Well, no, this is the thing, yeah, and. I think,
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Both his dad and I have always said, I don't even know how you'd begin to navigate this if you don't have the help or, or
and the confidence,
the headspace, really. But
there it is. So I will ask you how you, because you've rung in, and I don't know what it was precisely that prompted you to ring in, but when you hear a Prime Minister blaming this situation on the doctors, what's your response?
I think he needs to go and actually visit a hospital for once. I don't know, but I think I honestly have got to the point now. So long time listener of yours, but we've honestly got to the point now. I don't think they care. No. I really don't think they care at all. So.
No, I hear you, and I would, just because you're a suffering mum, I'd like to push back on that, even with my very low opinion of these people, and tell you I don't think it's quite that bad, but I'm afraid I do too. Actually, I think that every day you see more evidence that they're interested only in tomorrow's headlines in newspapers that are already sycophantically committed to their cause. They're not remotely interested in what is actually happening to people on the ground. Tamsin, I'm sorry. I just am, and I hope things improve sooner rather than later. And another evidence, because I mentioned epilepsy at the outset, a teenager that we know being diagnosed after going to A&E mid-seizure, but not having any appointment yet until the new year. and still not a specified date. So, living with this diagnosis without any real knowledge of what they should be doing or even what it might mean. Thank you. 10:48 is the time.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
10:51 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Kieran and a couple of others pointing out the very stupid way that New Labour funded, or Tony Blair and Gordon Brown funded, some of the hospital building under PFI initiatives. Very important that not that part of the story is not ignored, but it doesn't have any bearing upon Rishi Sunak trying to blame current waiting list levels on doctors, which is what is under discussion today in a fairly heartbreaking fashion, actually. Here's an interesting point, just picking up on what Tamsin told us a moment ago. So the EHCP that she referred to is a sort of assessment that the Education Authority commissions, in a sense, to ensure that a child with needs will have those needs met, with needs or a disability, special educational needs or a disability or a permanent illness, an ongoing illness, will be met in the school setting. And as Tamsin was speaking, I got this text. James, I'm an educational psychologist, a crucial part of the support network for disabled children and children with special educational needs. We've just voted in favour of strike over our pay and conditions. So I imagine we will be demonised over the coming weeks and months. It's mad, isn't it, when you think about it in big picture terms? 13 years of, what's it called? Bacon slicing. Is it called bacon? 13 years of cuts until public services reach a point where they feel, members of public services, where they reach a point where they feel they have no choice now but to object. The only meaningful way in which you can collectively object to your terms and conditions in this country, in any country where it's still legal, is to take industrial action, is to withdraw your labour so that your political masters will address your concerns that they have thus far refused to address. It's always an action of last resort. And then when they reach this place of last resort, the client media in this country pops up to blame them. So you can see why Rishi Sunak thought he'd get away with it. I would have reduced waiting lists if it wasn't for you pesky doctors. It's like the worst episode of Scooby-Doo ever. But I don't think he will on this occasion. I'm not quite sure why. Kate's in Manchester. Kate, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First time caller, and I'm absolutely raging, and that's why I had to phone in.
Fill your boots.
My husband is a consultant anaesthetist, and I've worked in operating theatres for 17 years, something like that. And I've had to give up work because management wouldn't let me reduce my hours because of childcare. Yeah. So theatre has lost an experienced member of staff because they insisted that I worked weekends, and I couldn't work weekends.
So they said to you, it's our way or the highway, effectively.
Yeah.
And
so I took the highway.
Just stupid, isn't it? Well,
and so many others are. Now, so my husband is working. He's now done 21 days straight. He's not had a day off. He works usually till at least 7 o'clock at night, sometimes 9 o'clock at night. If he's on call, he could be working all night, and then he has to go into work in the morning. He is doing everything he can to get the waiting list down. If anaesthetist, unless you've got an anaesthetist,
you can't operate.
You can't operate. Now, they are exhausted. Morale is rock bottom. They've started fighting amongst themselves because, they cannot work any harder. There isn't enough staff. They say, we're going to plough this many £1 million into the NHS. To become a consultant anaesthetist takes at least 15 years. Yeah. You can't just plough a ton of money into the NHS and expect waiting lists to come down. This is about there being not enough staff and,
Yeah, well, it's the 2 R's and the 2 I's. It's recruitment and retention, and it's investment and infrastructure, none of which are addressed by saying, we're spending more today than we did yesterday.
Money doesn't, when I say money doesn't come into this, yes, money does come into it. But unless you cannot do major surgery without there being an overseeing consultant, either both on the surgical side or on the anaesthetic side. So it will take at least 20 years to even try, and
So the political challenge is an oil tanker, isn't it, really? Right. I mean, it's got to be turned around. Well, I can see why you're raging, because...
Well, my husband's not striking. This is the thing. In his NHS trust,
right,
at least 50% of the consultants in his department, it may be more, but obviously you don't have to say whether you're striking. He is not striking. When the junior doctors walk out, he is not striking, and neither is the surgeon that he's working with. That list will go ahead. As far
it's incredible. So he's getting a kicking from all sides in a way. He's not only seeking to, working every hour God sends to help people. He's being blamed for the problems that he really is trying as hard as he possibly can, to the exclusion of industrial action, to solve. I mean, that's doubly unfair.
Yeah, but that's not exclusive. A lot of people.
I'm sure.
He mainly specialises in bowel cancers, and there's so many people. He's also the lead in, the pre-op appointments, that he leads the pre-op appointments. And the problem he's seeing in the pre-op department is, because people have been on the waiting list so long,
things have got worse. The
patient's health has deteriorated so much that they need extra tests. He had a patient last week.
So we're spending more money. So again, it's the difference between spending and investment, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you think, he had a patient that needed urgent surgery. Within the pre-op environment, he discovered that he had cardiac problems, so they couldn't operate. So they referred him for cardiac tests, and his appointments come through as next February.
Oh, so God, it'll be even worse by then. So, I mean, really, the things are... The waiting lists themselves, the statistic, mad though it sounds, given that it's so enormous, and that this figure of speech normally refers to something that's small, they are the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
In real terms. So there's no, forgive me, Kate, there's no light at the end of the tunnel on a personal level for your husband, is there really? Or is there?
There is, because he gets an enormous amount of job satisfaction from helping people. And I mean, yesterday my daughter had an event in school, and he actually had to explain to my daughter that he couldn't go because one, he was actually doing a paediatric dental list, so he was the anaesthetist for young children so one, he didn't want to have to cancel that list. Two, there was no one else qualified enough to do that list. So he had to explain to my daughter that he couldn't watch her getting her prize because he had to go and do this list. So it has a knock-on. I mean,
of course it does. Did she understand? Did she understand?
Oh, God. Yeah, she's 13. And listen, he's got two children that went through COVID. These are children that didn't see their father for months on end because he was working 16-hour shifts in ITU. So... these doctors, that they're not in it for the money.
No.
My husband is at the point of leaving the BMA, which is his union, because he believes that they've become a little bit too militant.
Fair enough.
They were, I think, I'm not actually sure, because for me to have a conversation with my husband, I almost
need to
make an appointment. Well, I need to make an appointment. Yeah.
I hear you.
I'm not sure if they were offered 8%. I'm not sure, but that was rejected, and he didn't get a say on whether that was rejected or not. That was taken upon.
That is the nature of the ballot. But you remind us all, of course, that the reportage, whether it's sympathetic or hostile, is lazy. It's simplistic, because it speaks about doctors as if they're all part of the same worldview, as if they're all on exactly the same page, and you remind us that they're clearly not. But the notion of the Prime Minister trying to blame the waiting lists upon the doctors, I think, whatever page you're on, remains absolutely toxic. And speaking of toxic, thank you, Kate. I'm already a bit late for the news. I hope you feel you had a fair crack of the whip. Speaking of toxic, breaking news in Brexit Britain, Enoch Powell is trending. Do you want to have a little guess as to why? The godfather of modern racism and fake race scares, infamous rivers of blood speech, claiming to quote constituents, but 50 years later no one can find any evidence. No one could find any evidence at the time that he was quoting constituents at all, although they're not hard to find. He could borrow idiots' calls. So why might Enoch Powell be trending? I'll give you a clue. It's got something to do with the next year's London mayoral election. Now, there's a little riddle you can ponder over.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 4 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I certainly no happier territory explored in the next hour than we were exploring in the last. I hope you don't mind me sometimes sort of confiding in you about the way my attitude to my job changes over the years and the sort of reasons why my enthusiasm for spending time with you every day is astonishingly undimmed even after 2 decades. And part of the reason happened earlier this week when we discussed something that has been a hardy perennial of radio phone-ins for almost as long as radios have existed, certainly for as long as I've been alive, give or take. And I arrived at a new realisation. I arrived at a new understanding of an issue because I never really grasped the confected outrage expressed all across right-wing media whenever a police officer behaves in a relaxed and friendly fashion at a public gathering. But when we were discussing the confected outrage about police officers dancing at Notting Hill Carnival or wearing badges in support of gay pride, I had a proper penny drop moment. I suddenly realised that it's got nothing to do with police officers dancing. It's because Notting Hill Carnival is correctly perceived as a black British celebration, although thankfully everybody else is welcome. And obviously gay pride is a celebration of different sexualities. So what people who get cross, who claim to be cross with the dancing coppers are really cross about are coppers being nice to people that they don't think coppers should be nice to. And it was nice, actually, that we clipped it. We clipped it up really well. And it was one of those wonderful clips that sort of went quasi-viral. It's certainly not one of my greatest hits. But sometimes when you do a clip like that, when you do a clip about bigotry, the replies, some of the replies do make my point in a much more powerful way than I've actually managed to do myself. So the replies were largely positive, but the negative ones literally proved my point to an almost unbelievable degree. So what you're really cross about is the police being nice to black people, and then lots of racism coming in response, apparently as a way of challenging the point that I'd made, which I thought was, I mean, sort of, there was almost a sort of rhetorical beauty to it. Twitter's done amazing things in that space, hasn't it? It made you aware of people who are precisely the problem you describe and prove it daily by responding to the problem you've described. So I mention all of that because it came back to me today when I started reading about Scotland Yard admitting that it's overused its power to strip search children. The detail of the case of child Q is absolutely grim, and I will be sharing it with you shortly, so be warned about that. But you know that you live in a country where people in the media and the political establishment will get crosser about an officer wearing a multicoloured helmet at a gay pride march or having a brief little boogie with a carnival goer in Notting Hill than they will about this. Because, of course, child Q was black. I mean, it is not beyond the realms of possibility that you could hear somebody attacking officers dancing at Notting Hill Carnival while defending officers who strip-searched a menstruating 15-year-old girl to the point of insisting that she removed her sanitary pad, looking apparently for cannabis. Imagine that. I don't know what would have happened to someone to have arrived in a place where you're going to give the copper wearing a multicoloured helmet a kicking and the coppers strip-searching children a word of support. But the detail of this story is stunning, as you know. I've just perhaps shared the grisliest element of it, and the reason why the strip search was deemed appropriate was very simply because child Q was treated differently because of her race and sex, and because no appropriate adult was present, and because the officers did not get authorization from a supervisor. Met bosses have agreed to write formal letters of apology to child Q and her family. I guess in the olden days, when I adopted a slightly more simplistic approach to these matters, I'd now invite you to ring in and tell me whether or not these officers should be sacked. But I think that is, I mean, unless you subscribe to the, dancing coppers bad, strip searching school children good school of right-wing thought or racist thought in this country, let's call it what it is, I can't really see any justification for leaving these people in the force at all. But we will ask that question, we will float it. But what I find staggering is actually the fact that this happens at all. You know, I was expelled from a very expensive public school for involvement in cannabis, and I was 17 or 18 at the time. The idea that they would have strip searched me is absolutely ridiculous, because I am, well, a middle-class white boy. It just wouldn't have happened. I'm putting this out there as a suggestion, but it's a suggestion that is built on pretty much close to certainty. Why was this 15-year-old girl? So teachers thought and it means that the discrimination is happening. It's coming from the teachers as well as from the coppers. So apparently she smelled of cannabis. I don't know how much time you've spent in London, and I appreciate that a school would probably be a fairly remarkable environment or an exceptional environment, but you can't generally walk to Greggs and back in this town at the moment without smelling cannabis. It's become as much a part of the London airscape as smog was in the 50s. But apparently she smelled of cannabis. This is the story that I think of all the stories we've discussed in the last couple of years, and whether it's because of the age of my children or the knowledge that I too came to the police's attention for cannabis-related issues, although I was guilty. She, of course, wasn't. But the idea that a schoolgirl, a 15-year-old girl, a teacher says, oh, she smells of cannabis. A 15-year-old girl, right? And you have the right, of course, to insist that she empties her pockets or you go through her satchel, if that's still the correct word to use. It's a rucksack these days, isn't it? No one has a satchel anymore. And then they decide to call the police. Do you know, I'm tempted to do a phone-in on which bit of the story is most shocking, but I think you can agree that it's the sanitary pad, right? It's the idea that I can't say it. That got me then. That is just nuts. What we're going to do? 2 female officers, I'll take it out. And then do what? But actually, if you step away from the actual stomach-turning element of that bit of the story, the point at which the teachers decided to phone the police is pretty staggering to me. If she'd been found with a bale of grass or she was knocking it out to year 7 during morning break, then, yeah, obviously. But because a teacher thought they could smell cannabis, failed to find any, a 15-year-old girl is essentially incarcerated and then strip-searched by 2 disgusting police officers. It's like a sort of competition of disgusting behaviour, this, isn't it? The solicitor for Child Q said that the family welcomed the decision, but were disappointed that it has taken over 2 years to reach this stage in the process. In the meantime, they urge the Home Office, the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing to act promptly on the recommendations from the IOPC for a substantial review of police powers and laws. Scotland Yard has admitted overusing its power to strip search children after 4 officers were told they would face disciplinary proceedings over the case of Child Q. Inappropriate and amounted to discrimination owing to her race and sex, which is why I can say to you with some certainty, as someone of a different ethnicity and a different sex, who also came to the attention actually of specific drug squad officers, I just can't begin to imagine any circumstances whatsoever in which they would have wanted to inspect my anal cavity as a schoolboy. There's a phrase you weren't expecting to hear when you turned your radio on this morning. So I've sort of taken myself a little bit by surprise while talking about this, because it was going to be a fairly straightforward phone-in, but actually it's a bit like the waiting lists in the last hour. It's something so awful and so huge that I can't believe, in a sense, that we're chalking it up as a story to talk about. I overuse the phrase, we should be marching, we should be on the streets about this. But, the fact that these what is it? The two elements of the story that are unbelievable. Three elements of the story are unbelievable. Number one, they called the police, right? Number two, the police did these unthinkable and disgusting things to this child. Number three, there were four of them and teachers. And at no point did anybody present. This is the bit I can't get my head around. And I think the question will be, can you? 0345 6060 973 for fairly obvious reasons. You might not be as shocked by this as I am. All right? Because the third element of it is probably the thing that I find hardest to understand. Because, it's like the WhatsApp groups, isn't it? Where you think, how can one of them have not said, all right, lads, let's stop it now. Or I think you've crossed the line. That's the point, isn't it, with appalling behaviour? It's in the context of child abuse, desperate attempts to bring in something called mandatory reporting, where you don't just sort of look away. You actually are criminalised if you don't blow the whistle. You can see why people are reluctant to blow the whistle. But the idea that you have four teachers present and presumably four police officers involved in the decision-making process, no appropriate adult was present, no authorisation was secured from a supervisor, and if I was a teacher and this was your daughter, I would not have let it happen. I don't even think that is, susceptible to accusations of virtue signalling. Just run through in your mind the words behind what I just said to you. As a teacher, I'm not going to let police officers strip a child, remove her sanitary product, and conduct some form of internal examination on school premises. And you live in a country where people still claim to be cross about coppers dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival. They're the coppers we should be going after. Jeez, man. It's unbelievable, right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I'll take any answer you've got on this, and the question is as big as you want it to be or as small as you want it to be. I don't understand how this happened because of my upbringing, my class, my ethnicity, and my sex. You might. So, how did this happen? 0345 6060 973. And if you want to bring in a side order of people who express absolute outrage about police officers dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival, but have very little to say, or even perhaps offer up words of support for police officers caught up in situations like this, then you'd be welcome to. But the fundamental question I want you to answer is this. How did this happen? Knowing what you know, thinking what you think, how the hell did this happen? Because it's the third time I've covered this story and I still don't really get it. I wonder if I ever will.
James O'Brien. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It's 20 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Some astonishing news just breaking on Sky News, actually, where it has been reported that 80 officers, on the day that Daniel Khalif, you'll remember, the terror suspect who escaped in slightly sort of Hollywood circumstances, on the day that he escaped, 80 officers didn't turn up for their shift at Wandsworth Prison. So there should have been 205 prison officers on shift to deal with 1,594 prisoners, but instead there were 125. I mean, crikey, I can't do every hour based on things I can't get my head around. But that is something else I can't quite get my head around. And we may turn our attention to it a little later in the programme, or it may just stay in the realms of news rather than conversations for us. But there it is, 80 officers who didn't turn up for their shift for a variety of reasons, I presume, on the day of Daniel Khalif's escape. Absolutely staggering. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. I mean, sometimes I do get texts that I sort of read them 3 or 4 times to make sure that I haven't missed some sort of point. And these are the days when I wish I could read out phone numbers. I wish you could give David a little ring and tell him what you think of him. If this child was white, would you be going mental on the radio, or are you doing this to jump on the bandwagon? Asked David, who might as well just have racist tattooed across his forehead. Incredible. I don't think I can answer that question, David, in words that you'd be able to understand. I don't know what the radio equivalent of crayon on a toilet wall would be, frankly. But I'm not the man. I think you might have accidentally tuned into the wrong programme. And the reason you are shocked, says Andy, is that you see the victim as human. This might be helpful, David, for you, actually. These police and teachers didn't see Child Q as human. When you dehumanise someone, it's easy to treat them as less than you. They saw her colour as an excuse to treat her as nothing, and that sickens me. I've both seen this behaviour and read about it in history books. Jordan's in Worthing. Jordan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First of all, just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I've been listening to you for
you don't know yet. It might be the worst experience of your life, mate, but so far, so good.
Well, let's hope not. Just to forewarn you, I'm also on a building site. I've gone to the quietest place possible, so hopefully there's no interruption.
Okay.
Just a bit of background. I'm mixed race myself. I grew up in a relatively small town, but I've been sort of stop and searched a few times.
Yeah.
I had a group of friends that I used to hang around with, pretty much all of them all white.
Right.
And there were times when sort of, there could have potentially been troublemakers in the area.
Yes.
I'm no angel myself, but every time that we were stopped as a group, I would be the focal point of the sort
You'd
of
be
police
treated differently from your friends.
Most certainly. There's been 2 instances where I was put in handcuffs and actually searched while my friends just sort of stood there and their names were taken and that was about it.
What did your friends make of it? I hope that's not the wrong question to ask, but I am...
No, that's absolutely fine. They were obviously very angry themselves. They were saying, that's clearly racially motivated. They were very open in their opinion of it to the police in that instance. I think with regards to this poor girl, I think a lot of institutions like police, teaching, pretty much any institution there is, you're going to have bad apples, and I think unfortunately she's got every single one of them.
You don't think it's more institutional than that? Because bad apple is exceptional, and we know the Met's problem is institutional because, of course, not only did Macpherson say that when after Stephen Lawrence's murder, would have been his 49th birthday this week, and but Louise Casey said it again a couple of years ago. So I don't know that bad apples is quite the answer.
I see where you're coming from. I really do. But I over the years I've dealt with I've had many run-ins with the police, not in a negative light. Just means I've come across police in my line of work. I did security for a few years as well.
Oh yeah.
But I've met plenty of police, and there are obviously a lot of police that are good police.
No, of course there are. I didn't mean to suggest that there weren't, but the problem here is it would be too much of a coincidence if everybody else working out of that police station and every other teacher in that school would have behaved differently, but by some astonishingly unfortunate aligning of the planets, this poor kid ended up with the 4 nasty coppers and the 2 stupid teachers. It just wouldn't stand up in a court of law, would it? I mean, God, that's really unlucky because everyone else would have been outraged by this. They must, because there's also the environment of impunity in which the police officers thought that this was in any way acceptable behaviour, and part of that would have been created by the teachers not kicking off. I mean, you'd have kicked off, right, if you were in security and the police turned up because you'd collared a 15-year-old who shouldn't have been doing what they were doing, and they said, right, we're going to strip search her now and remove her sanitary products so that we can inspect. You just wouldn't put up with it. You wouldn't stand aside, I don't think.
Absolutely. I also feel that there's an environment that's been sort of created where it's somewhat okay for police to, I hate the term abuse their power, but
well, that's what it is.
They're dealing with a child, and they are essentially abusing their power. They're the authoritative figure in the room, and if there is that one policeman that doesn't agree, but they're too scared to sort of speak up,
that's true too.
For fear of sort of reparations,
like a sort of bystander effect. You're waiting for someone else to do it first, even though you feel that it's wrong. You don't want to be the one to move first. I mean, what you've done perfectly is convey how commonplace it is for people of colour to be treated differently by police from the rest of us. Just how completely commonplace it is. So this is a very extreme example, And your experiences, although not fun, are not extreme, but it's a bedrock of commonality. It's a commonplace practice still in 2023 for police officers to see two people and treat them according to their skin colour.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, as sad as it is, that is still the case. I mean, even at the age of 32, it's been sort of 15, 16 years since I was actually, fully stopped and put in handcuffs and searched in that sort of manner. But I'm still a bit apprehensive when walking past.
Yeah, I mean, and goodness only knows what impact it's had on this child, considerably more traumatising. And I think I read reports about terrible impacts upon her mental health. I mean, it sounds like I'm trivialising it, but you know that I'm not when I say which bit of it is most shocking. The number of officers that were involved, the number that turned up, the teachers standing by and doing nothing, the teachers phoning the police because one of them thought they could smell cannabis, or two of them, or 10 of them, I don't care. Just bizarre. Thank you, Jordan. Great stuff. 27 minutes after 11. Maxine is in Harrow. How did this happen, Maxine?
I don't know, to be honest. Sorry, I should say I'm a first-time caller, so a little bit nervous.
Welcome, it's only me.
Yeah, I'm a primary head teacher, and I can't envisage a time when I would call the police on a child on the suspicion that you smell.
Yes.
Cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, if they had a satchel full of crack cocaine, then you'd be on the phone in a heartbeat, but not the smell of cannabis.
Yeah. And I wonder how much experience police have got with the scent of cannabis, that it would be emanating from an orifice that, masked by the smell of sanitary products.
Yeah.
What made them think that a child would secrete something so deeply, and that they would still be able to
I mean, it happens at prisons. We know. I don't. Well, yeah. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
so we can smell it even though it's there.
Yeah.
Right. God, yeah. I hadn't even thought of that. I told you every turn on this story is as shocking or more shocking than the last. And then no one in the room said, "Hang on a minute. If you're searching it because you think you can smell it, that's not going to.
It's not going to be hidden there.
Oh, blimey.
But also, I mean, with regards to the teachers, it should have been senior members of staff, firstly.
Right.
So I can't imagine it would have been a low-level class teacher or a form tutor. It should have been somebody of relatively seniority. But also, we act as loco parentis, and I can't imagine any parent calling the police on their child without a proper conversation and getting other people involved, i.e., so if I've had need to call the police, and I have had need to call the police when I've realised a child has had a weapon on them.
Yes.
And I have notified the parents have come in and spoken with the police, with me present and the child present. I have never, ever called the police without parental knowledge. Not consent, but parental knowledge.
Yeah.
And I don't know why no one had the foresight to call the parents.
Well, they may have done. I don't know the details, but it doesn't really matter, does it? Because even, as you say, in loco parentis, someone should have been saying, "You can't do this. You simply can't do this." Every time I read it, I think that I'm tripping. It's just unthinkable, the idea that they asked her to remove her sanitary towel.
Yeah.
The poor kid.
And what was the aftermath in terms of what support was she given when, because the police would say no further action was taken.
Yeah.
And so what happens then?
I think I can't remember, but I know that I read about impacts on her mental health and that she was receiving counselling. But you just, the mind truly boggles. And then to learn, as we did shortly afterwards, that it's not, it's not a one-off. Scotland Yard had admitted overusing its power. Even the phrase "its power to strip search children" sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, doesn't it? Something out of The Handmaid's Tale.
Well, I've never searched a child physically. We always ask children to remove things from their pockets and empty out their school bag, take off their socks and shoes. I've had children hide money in their shoes. but I never physically stripped, searched, or searched a child. I've never put my hand on a child.
No.
And I certainly wouldn't do that, without a parental...
No, of course. No. Well, I mean, there was no appropriate adult present either. That's one of the things that may lead to...
You could say that the teachers were appropriate adults.
I would think they were on the other side of a closed door, if I remember correctly. But that shouldn't have happened either. Any person subject to a search involving the exposure of intimate body parts is in a vulnerable position, and they are entitled to be treated with respect, said the director of the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Shall I tell you what I think happened? I think that the 15-year-old girl was probably pretty outraged by what was happening to her, and they used the strip searching as a means of humiliating her.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories of humiliation and using strip searching as a tool or a weapon in order to gain some kind of compliance and to break someone's spirit, and that's historic.
Well, it's historic, but not so much for outspoken white children.
No, absolutely.
Didn't happen to me.
Yeah.
Maxine, thank you. You made us late for the news, but that's because I was listening so closely to what you were saying, I forgot to look at the clock. I'll get the hang of this job one day. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
That's, of course, what institutional racism is, isn't it? So if, as seems likely, this 15-year-old girl was strip-searched in a hideous fashion, up to and including being ordered to remove her period product. Thank you, Andy, for picking me up on my language there. Then institutional racism involves not actually having a problem with a young black girl being humiliated in this way, because although you would never tolerate it being done to your daughter or sister or friend, your institutional racism leads you to a place where you think it's different for a 15-year-old black girl. And unfortunately, that would seem to include the police. Rishi Sunak's just released a short video about XL dogs that I am going to play to you because it's genuine breaking news, and more stories emerging. It's a weird one. I said it to you last week with the rack concrete. It's as if the news is a magnifying lens rather than just a lens. And when an issue is already in the news, things that would not necessarily have been reported quite as strongly as they would have done a month ago will be reported more. So these so-called XL bully dogs, which are largely a consequence of inbreeding, I was reading this morning, have understandably, after the footage of that horrible attack in Birmingham, become much more in the news. But the decision to ban them, if it's feasible, is probably the right one, albeit that we had a bit of we had a good talk about it, didn't we, earlier in the week. But anyway, here's the Prime Minister.
The American XL bully dog is a danger to our communities, particularly our children. I share the nation's horror at the recent videos we've all seen. Yesterday we saw another suspected XL bully dog attack, which has tragically led to a fatality. It's clear this is not about a handful of badly trained dogs. It's a pattern of behaviour, and it cannot go on. While owners already have a responsibility to keep their dogs under control, I want to reassure people that we are urgently working on ways to stop these attacks and protect the public. Today I have tasked ministers to bring together police and experts to firstly define the breed of dog behind these attacks with a view to then outlawing it. It is not currently a breed defined in law, so this vital first step must happen fast. We will then ban the breed under the Dangerous Dogs Act, and new laws will be in place by the end of the year. These dogs are dangerous. I want to reassure the public that we will take all necessary steps to keep people safe.
11:38, that's Rishi Sunak speaking on social media a few moments ago. I haven't forgotten my hook and tease, actually, on this occasion, when I asked you shortly before 11 o'clock why you thought Enoch Powell might be trending and what it could possibly have to do with next year's London mayoral election. I'm leaving it hanging deliberately. It's such a bizarre and unpleasant story that it actually merits a guest, which is why we will be inviting one onto the programme in about 7 or 8 minutes' time. You are going to find it quite hard to believe, but I'll give you another clue. I didn't find it that hard to believe. So we've got two little clues now as to why Enoch Powell is trending this morning on what we used to call Twitter. Clue number one, it's got something to do with next year's London mayoral election. And clue number two, you might be shocked by this news, but I wasn't. I wonder if I can think of another clue before 11:45. I don't know, but we are currently discussing, I would say linked, but rather different matters at the moment. Dan's in Leeds. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hi, I haven't called a radio station before, but when I heard what you were talking about,
yes,
I thought I had something relevant.
Thank you.
That's that. 18 years ago, I was in the police in Leeds.
Yeah,
and I've not really thought about this for a long time, to be honest. But when I heard what you were talking about, it was
take your time back. Take all the time you want.
Yeah, so I saw. I'd only been in it a year, so I had a mentor, and I saw what I thought was abuse from my mentor in the custody cells, and I didn't do anything to stop it. I didn't say anything, either at the time or afterwards, really, and I just went home, and it kind of haunted me, and it still does, really. I just my next shift block, I phoned in sick, and the shift block after that, and then I just I kind of left the force after that. Really, I stopped.
Blimey! So it broke your enthusiasm for the job, really.
Well, it broke my enthusiasm, but that wasn't really what I was calling for. Is to say that I didn't. It still haunts me to this day, like 18 years later, that I didn't do anything. Was it a form of sexual abuse? Was it, or was it violence?
No,
it was. It wasn't. I don't think it was as bad as the girl that you was talking about. He wasn't a child. He was 17.
Right.
But he was. So obviously, this other officer was my mentor, and I'm supposed to look up to him. But we were on a night shift. I wouldn't give anything away that would be accusations.
Sure, of course.
But we pulled over a car, and it was this young 17-year-old lad. He was all insured and everything, but he gave abuse back. He gave some jib to my colleague, basically, who seemed to take it personal. And then we did a whole search of the car, and we found something in it that we'd managed to justify arresting him, basically.
Yeah.
So we took him down to custody and booked him in. And when we did the regular search, we found a very small amount of cannabis on him.
Right.
Which then my colleague's eyes lit up because this kid had been, giving abuse, not giving abuse, but being mouthy, if you like, to my colleague.
Yeah.
His eyes almost lit up because that meant that he could then ask for a strip search, which he did, and I had to you have to have one other witness there, so I had to stand in the door while my colleague revelled in basically humiliating this young kid. He wasn't a child; he was 17, but I could tell
you couldn't quite.
That it was wrong.
Sure, I hear you.
And it was for the wrong reasons, and he was getting revenge on this kid for. I think he wasn't doing what a policeman's supposed to do.
No, I think I get I do get the picture. It's mad, that, isn't it? Because you're clearly a good man, and doing nothing while bad things happen. I bet it doesn't haunt the bloke that did it, Dan.
I bet he doesn't even remember.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
It can't have been just
I've got
that.
young kids of my own. And
so you just imagine the people that are supposed to be in positions of trust and authority, but also, to take it back to the Notting Hill Carnival thing, also in community relations. It's not just about, stick, it's carrot as well, isn't it? It's community relations as much as it is anything else. But I don't know what to say, because I kind of want to say don't be so hard on yourself. But A, it's not going to make a blind bit of difference to you 18 years later. And B, I kind of understand why you have used the word haunted.
I do think I learned from it, though.
Yes,
I'm a lot older now. I'm in my 40s now. I was mid-20s, and I didn't have kids of my own. I could tell it was wrong, but now that I do have young kids, they're not 17 yet, they can't drive yet, but the thought of something like that happening to them, because this was a normal kid. This was just a normal cocky kid that didn't deserve to be humiliated like that.
Yeah.
So the thought of that happening to one of my kids and someone not having the opportunity to step in and not doing, it's it's kind of a big regret in the back of my mind. But
I hear it.
But I'm older now.
You are, and wiser, and probably we'd both hope that we would act differently in those sort of circumstances today. That can't have been the only reason. Was that the only reason that you decided to knock it on the head, or was it part of it?
There were other things.
Yeah.
That was all I wanted to talk about. I mean, as you're talking about racism, there were lots of other little things, like when I went to interview a guy. I can't remember what he was reporting, but he said the word. He thought that whatever had happened to him had a racial element to it,
right.
And I was just noting that down in my notebook. And a mentor who was different to that one, actually, a different mentor that I had at the time said, "Whoa!" He told me to stop. He said, like, don't put the word race in it, otherwise, it makes it a much bigger job.
Right.
If the black guy I was talking to didn't suggest race was an element, then it's quite an easy thing to process. As soon as he says race, it
becomes a different sort of crime because because it involves discrimination. I hear you, Dan. Thank you, mate. That was really interesting. Seriously, I'm glad you rang in, and I understand why you did, because it's almost like a flashback, isn't it, for you, this story, or a form of echo. And when you use the word haunting, I completely understand why. I hope you ring me again on happier topics, because as you mentioned at the outset, it's the first time you've ever rung a radio station, and I'm glad that you did. It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I don't know if this is Idiot's Corner territory. I'm going to give Tony from Epsom the benefit of the doubt, and I'm just going to show him why he's being an idiot and leave him the room to retreat. So Tony decided, having listened to the same radio programme that you've been listening to, he decided to get his phone out and text, "Hello, James, you are making a mountain out of a molehill about all this strip searching." This is a 15-year-old girl strip searched without an appropriate adult present because a teacher thought that they could smell cannabis, and a search that included her being ordered to remove her period product. That's the molehill from which Tony thinks we are making a mountain. He adds, "This needs to be done as police have a job to do, and all this racist rubbish is not good, as it's all people like you out there that are putting the police force down when they are doing what they're supposed to do." Possibly a little bit generous. Not to put Tony in Idiot's Corner, because of course the Independent Office of Police Conduct have already prompted Scotland Yard to admit that they are overusing, or abusing if you prefer, their power to strip search children. So the literal point of the story, Tone, is that they're not supposed to do this. But Tony adds, "Let them get on with their job and we will all be safe in our communities." So here's the thing I think might help, Tony, right? I think I can smell cannabis coming off your text, right? So I'm going to send 2 police officers, the biggest I can find, to Epsom, where you will be strip searched and they'll shine a torch up your arse. Okay? That's what I'm going to do now, because I think I can smell cannabis coming off you. So we're going to send the biggest police officers in the station to your house in Epsom, or we may actually just turn up, chuck you in the car and take you down the station. And then we're going to make you strip, and then we're going to make you bend over, and we're going to shine a torch up your anus. Because that's the only way that we can all be safe in our communities, Tony. So just take a moment to cogitate upon that prospect. And then, hopefully, you'll understand why. I'm trying to be generous. You'll understand why perhaps you need to have a bit of a rethink. 11:51 is the time. Staying with matters racist. The organisation Hope Not Hate, who, as you know, are great friends of this programme, have undertaken an investigation into the Conservative candidate for London Mayor, a woman called Susan Hall. The clues I gave you were that Enoch Powell is trending on Twitter as a direct consequence of this investigation. I also mentioned that I'm not quite as shocked by it as others might be, because Susan Hall has come to my attention in the past, not least for tweeting that her enthusiasm for Liz Truss's mini budget, you remember the one that knocked £35 billion out of the British economy in a matter of minutes, she tweeted that it must be good because James O'Brien doesn't like it. So she's clearly unlikely to be accepted as a member of the Brains Trust anytime soon. But it turns out that tweet in particular wouldn't even make the top 20 tweets, obnoxious tweets, posted or liked by this politician. Georgina Laming is the campaign director at Hope Not Hate and is here now to tell us a little more. What have you found, Georgina?
Yeah, so Hope Not Hate researchers have found a bank of tweets liked or endorsed by Susan Hall. So they include liking posts about Enoch Powell saying it's never too late to save your country or to save London.
From what?
I'm guessing immigration. I'm guessing that's what that is. Also, Islamophobic tropes about Sadiq Khan saying that he supports election fraud or FGM, and even tweets saying that the 2020 US election was stolen.
I mean, she seems so nice.
You know, it's quite shocking, really, isn't it? It is quite shocking.
Well, have you had any response from her, or indeed from the chairman of the Conservative Party, Greg Hands?
Not yet. We sent him a message this morning to let him know what we've found, and asking for a suspension and investigation, and ultimately asking that she is removed as candidate. Because, I mean, the shocking thing about this, she hasn't hidden these views. Anyone can go through her likes on Twitter and see this. But no, they've been quiet.
I noticed another one, actually. I don't want to make light of it, but I did used to work with the fella. But Matthew Thompson, now at Sky News, then at LBC, she apparently described as a virus. Why was that? Can I ask?
Not entirely clear, to be honest.
Because she has a history of going after journalists. She went after Sam Coates, I remember, at Sky as well, and used that hashtag scum media, which is another favourite little tactic of the very far right, isn't it?
Yeah,
on both sides of the Atlantic.
I think this is what's concerning about these tweets. Not only are they racist, which is concerning in itself, but there is an undermining of democracy here by attacking the free press, by accusing your opponent of election fraud. It's a far-right tactic being used by a mainstream candidate, and that's why it's so concerning for us.
What prompted you to look into it? What were the? I mean, I presume you were bombarded with them, but was there a particular clue, a particular reason, an entry point to trawl through this filth?
I mean, unfortunately for Susan Hall, this isn't the first time it's happened, and so she's somebody who would be on our radar, like any candidate would be from any party. If we see that they're starting to share stuff that we think crosses that line, we will investigate it. Back in 2017, Susan Hall deleted all of her tweets. So
wasn't that because she was vile about someone on a reality television show?
Gemma Collins from Towie, who is a sweetheart. Yes, she was fat-phobic about her. And also, there's just general stuff that's happened before. I think that she's someone who's been on our radar because she's crossed a line, and that is true of any candidate, right? If we see kind of activity that we think is inappropriate, that we think undermines democracy, crosses a line in terms of racism, homophobia, then Hope Not Hate is there to investigate. And unfortunately, it's been her this time.
And, well, can you keep us posted if you get any response from Greg Hands? He seems to have an awful lot of time on his hands because he's never off Twitter, so presumably he'll be well aware of why Susan Hall and indeed Enoch Powell are currently drawing a lot of attention on that platform. Georgina Laming, thank you, campaign director at Hope Not Hate. Quick reminder, it's always helpful to remember this. Enoch Powell pops up quite a bit in my new book, actually, I should say, because there are, and this would fit very neatly with the reasons why, because I think until relatively recently, everyone was agreed that he was beyond the pale. He was persona non grata. It would be the BNP, for example, or the National Front. Or I'm afraid to say it would be the out and proud racists that were admiring of Enoch Powell. But then, of course, along came Nigel Farage, who reintroduced that kind of thing to the mainstream and continues, of course, to have his tummy tickled on all manner of media outlets, despite being an avowed admirer of Enoch Powell. Has been since he was a schoolboy. Oof. It is 11:56, and back to the story of this. Well, just a simple question of how this happened. T's in South London. T, what can you tell us?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
I mean, I think one of the main issues is lack of training that officers are seeing nowadays.
Really?
It's like
I'm not in the police force. I don't imagine I ever will be. I wouldn't need any training to know that this shouldn't be done.
I mean, like, the thing is, like, what did the teachers tell these officers? Like, because, I mean...
Well, they told them that they thought they could smell cannabis, but they'd searched her and her belongings and they hadn't turned anything up.
I mean, like, from experience, like, the last thing a police officer wants to do is a strip search, because it opens
unless
you up
they're
for a lot of
deliberately
complaints.
unless they're trying to deliberately humiliate the suspect.
I mean, nowadays,
what's your interest? Are you a copper? Are you in the force? What's your connection?
I used
to be. So, are you trying to defend the police officers? Because if you are, I'm here for it.
No, I'm not. I mean, on this particular occasion, it's it just seems to me as if new officers gone to a scene, have been given some information. You have to do this, and that, and when officers.
But they didn't clear it with a supervisor, so they categorically haven't been told to do it from above. You see.
Exactly. So lack of leadership is also.
Well, we've got lack of leadership. We've got lack of training. How about these coppers are just wrong-uns who should never have been allowed anywhere near children, let alone the uniform?
Then again, then you have to ask yourself why have they been, why are there police officers? How did they pass? How did they get to that stage?
Well, I mean, I will ask that when I know all of the details, and I can certainly nod towards that question now. But right now, I'm kind of wondering why. Well, we're doing the whys. Why are you kind of making excuses for them, man?
I mean, it's not as much as making excuses. It's just
they haven't had the training, they haven't had the right leadership. Would you have needed training or leadership to know that strip searching a 15-year-old girl and ordering her to remove her period product was just a sort of don't go there territory?
Yeah, no, that's not something I agree with. No, not at all.
Good.
But I mean, I think maybe more can be done in training these officers. The do's and the don'ts, and hopefully after the court case, that might be introduced. But I mean, I think it comes down to lack of training.
Okay. You were in the. I'll let that stand. You were in the force. I disagree. I wasn't in the force, so my opinion is less valuable. But I can't conceive of anybody needing training or leadership to know that this was utterly unacceptable behaviour. I think it was probably, if it was exactly as described, it was undertaken in full knowledge that it was out of order for reasons that we would probably chalk up as deliberate attempts to intimidate or humiliate. To clarify, the unnamed trio will face gross misconduct allegations over the treatment, so not a court case as such. And they are accused of carrying out a search that was inappropriate, that child Q was discriminated against because of her race and sex, and that having no appropriate adult present and not seeking authorisation from a supervisor also constitute offences. The officers could be sacked if the allegations are proven, but if they want to come in for a kicking from the Daily Mail, then they'd have to dance for 20 seconds at the Notting Hill Carnival.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 12, change of plan here. There was an interesting story in the Times about children not being taught to be obedient. We don't think obedience is as important as we used to do. But I'm drawn instead to the breaking news regarding those so-called Bully XL dogs. One article I read this week told me that 65, I think they can be traced back to inbreeding among a particularly virulent and violent strain of the species. We talked earlier in the week about the plausibility of banning specific breeds of dog. And, of course, we also talked, as we always do, about the other end of the lead in this case. There are always claims with any conversation about dangerous dogs that they are largely blameless and that when terrible things happen, they happen as a consequence of poor ownership. I know, like me, a lot of you listened to the call from a dad who kept the dog after it attacked his daughter quite viciously, quite violently, with a sense of wonder. But the emotions involved in something like that are, I imagine, things through which you would have to go to have a proper understanding. So they're banning, or he's going to. I'll play the clip again in a minute. So I've got a couple of questions for you, and I think once again it will be a conversation that benefits from you having more knowledge than I do about the issue. But I don't think you need to be an expert to join in by any stretch of the imagination. We say, well, listen to the clip actually, because there's some words in it that I want you to focus on, and I'll tell you what they are once we've listened to it.
The American XL Bully dog is a danger to our communities, particularly our children. I share the nation's horror at the recent videos we've all seen. Yesterday we saw another suspected XL Bully dog attack, which has tragically led to a fatality. It's clear this is not about a handful of badly trained dogs. It's a pattern of behaviour, and it cannot go on. While owners already have a responsibility to keep their dogs under control, I want to reassure people that we are urgently working on ways to stop these attacks and protect the public. Today, I have tasked ministers to bring together police and experts to firstly define the breed of dog behind these attacks with a view to then outlawing it. It is not currently a breed defined in law, so this vital first step must happen fast. We will then ban the breed under the Dangerous Dogs Act, and new laws will be in place by the end of the year. These dogs are dangerous. I want to reassure the public that we will take all necessary steps to keep people safe.
I don't want this to be an hour in which we criticise Rishi Sunak. We had plenty of that in the first hour, and so the temptation to accuse him of jumping on a bandwagon or having a knee-jerk reaction, if that is your view, then you're going to have to make it evidentially, not just because you don't like Rishi Sunak or you don't like the Tories. I put the three words I wanted to pick up on there were pattern, or pattern of behaviour, but pattern in particular, define and outlaw. So I just want to ask questions that I don't know the answer to, if I may. And one of them is, how do you define a breed? I don't know how you define a breed. How do you define a breed? 0345 6060 973. And I don't know how you successfully outlaw a breed. Last time this happened with the breeds that are currently outlawed, what did they do to the dogs that were already in families, that were already owned? I genuinely don't know. So this is a bit of a weird phone-in so far, because it is things that I could find out the answer to, but I'm asking you instead. What happens to the dogs that were already owned last time round? Do owners of these dogs now face confiscation and destruction? 0345 6060 973, because I'm a dog owner, and although it's highly unlikely that crosses of Cavalier King Charles Spaniels and miniature poodles are ever going to end up on a dangerous dogs list, the idea of the authorities turning up and taking her away it's quite chilling to me. Yeah, it's quite chilling to me. And then the third question is, and this might be where we leave the door a little bit ajar for Rishi Sunak bashing. Although, as I've said, I want it to be evidenced. How feasible is this? I almost want to know whether it worked last time. So there are two very, very fact-based questions, and one more opinion, I think, than detail. So stop being... There we go. It's nice to hear a speech from Rishi Sunak that doesn't contain the word deliver, says Chris in Brighton. Is this a sixth pledge? I'm not sure you're taking this quite as seriously as you should, Chris. And I would stress, I'm not criticising Chris, that, you know, although we may manage to have some moments of levity in this conversation, it is prompted in part by, as the Prime Minister said, by another fatality. This, again, in the West Midlands, actually, happened yesterday afternoon. The victim taken to hospital and subsequently died. So how do you define a breed? That is just something that could almost be on Mystery Hour, but I don't know the answer to the question. You might do. If you do, call me and tell me. How do you outlaw a breed? Does that involve destroying all the dogs that have been defined in current ownership? And then finally, how feasible is this? Well, actually, finally, is this the right thing to do? So we bring into that the feasibility of it, the morality of it, and all the rest of it. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. Henry Riley is a respected LBC journalist.
I suppose I'm not meant to laugh at that, am I?
I'm a little surprised at your response. I was hoping to make Keith laugh, not actually you. Tell people why I did that.
This is the story we did the other day about Surrey Heath Borough Council. When it was raised at their council, they did describe me as a respected LBC journalist. I was more surprised by journalists, let alone respected.
So the respected copyright Surrey Heath Borough Council, the respected LBC journalist. Henry Riley, you spent time with a XL bully dog owner this week. Did your opinion, and I know you are not in the business of opinions, you are obviously a reporter. We call it the Theo Usherwood principle. You're not allowed to express an opinion on the programme, however much provocation you have to endure from me. But did your attitude, your view change with familiarity, with exposure to them?
Yes. Right. So I'd be completely lying if I said my view didn't ameliorate when I met Dublin, which was the name of
great word. It was maths last time you were here. Now we do thesaurus. Wow.
But so Dublin was an 8-stone American bully who I met on Wednesday, and his owner David was very nice, very kind, inviting me to North London to come and meet him. And the first thing that happened when I got there, and I'd say I'm a dog person normally, but this huge dog ran towards me, and of course I was slightly nervous, and he was very clear before the owner David that he was very friendly, and he jumped up on me the first thing this dog did, but he was nothing but friendly. And so I appreciate I'm not speaking for all XL bullies or whatever, but it was very friendly, it was very calm. I mean, there was quite a funny moment, James, where after it ran up to me, it instead decided to lie on its back and sort of ask for a tummy tickle in that way dogs do. So it wasn't this sort of, I was going with expecting to be slightly concerned, and that certainly didn't happen.
And when you say big, how big
is the dog?
Yeah.
So 8 stone is they've got really strong arms.
How much do you weigh?
Which is I weigh now. What do I weigh? I know in kilograms. Yeah. I weigh 89 kilograms.
Right. So what's that? About 12 stone?
No, it's heavier than that.
Is it heavier than
14 stone?
Okay,
yeah.
so over half your weight.
Yes.
Okay,
and
that's big, isn't it?
Their arms are huge. Yes, which is really interesting.
Is that the correct term? Is it arms or forelegs?
Oh no, 4 legs. Sorry, 4 legs. Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Their 4 legs are huge because there were a few other people in this. It was a walking park, which is sort of a safe park for certain dogs who may be interested in other dogs in the park. And whenever it saw a sort of other person passing through, it didn't run up to it. Instead, it just sort of stood there with its forearms.
Yeah.
And you could see just how strong this thing was. And in terms of its diet as well, it doesn't eat dog food. So, say with a few XL bullies, they told me they will cook it as steak. They will give it sometimes gammon and eggs. It likes blueberries, broccoli. It has a better diet than me.
Yeah, but we haven't discussed your diet on the programme. It is shocking.
It's not, reduced section of a supermarket. But anyway,
it was vegetarian kebab meat from the reduced section of the supermarket you had for your tea a couple of weeks ago.
That did happen. Yeah. That roll.
We digress slightly. So do we know where the phenomenon comes from? I mean, do we know, A, where it starts, and B, why it has suddenly become, I mean, partly because of filmed attacks, that always it feeds the news agenda, but why hasn't this happened sooner?
What I thought was interesting talking with David is he admitted that actually, I mean, he's very much a dog person, but that he accepted that they have a ferocious look, which is how he described it, as ferocious. And indeed, his video is leased out. It's a dog actor, believe it or not, Dublin, the dog I met. So it's used in TV shows, in music videos and whatnot. And he said it's often used to have that sort of angry, ferocious look. And so I think that there's a recognition there, and he would certainly suggest that perhaps people buy this dog, because he used to be a breeder as well, people buy this dog in order to look tough, and in some instances. So I think there's a sort of sense as well that it's perhaps an easy win for the government, this, and there was no cross-party, there's no sort of opposition.
Well, you can't. I mean, you can't really stand up. There's lazy politics, perhaps, but you can't stand up and say, I'm on the side of the we used to call them devil dogs when I was younger, when we reported on these stories. And do we know, and I'll take calls on this, but David will now be very worried, presumably, about the fate of Dublin.
So I've been trying to find out what will happen with regards to this. I was speaking with Lord Baker, the former Home Secretary, who actually introduced the Dangerous Dogs Act back in 1991. Kenneth Baker. Oh, and he was suggesting that actually there will be a case for a lot of these dogs to be destroyed. That is the official expression, which I know is not particularly nice. But
no, we've got to do it.
From what I understand, James, there will be legal requirements now for XL bullies to be muzzled in public at all times.
Right.
There will be a requirement for them to be on a lead in all public places, and for all XL bullies to be neutered.
Crikey. Oh, okay. So that obviously removes the prospect of the next generation, although it's presumably not the most open and regulated market in the first place. So hard to guarantee. And a couple of my callers pointing out that if the actual ban on American pit bulls, or sort of some of the dogs that were supposed to have been banned last time, had happened, then this breed would never have come into existence. I don't know about that. I shall find out from my callers, as always. That's the very highly respected, or very respected?
Very respected, I think.
Very respected LBC journalist Henry Riley, with the latest on his personal experiences with an XL bully dog this week. And you know, as Henry spoke, and he balked himself at the use of the word destroyed. I used to get on my high horse on dangerous dog subjects. I explained this to you earlier in the week, before I was a dog owner. And it's an interesting question. Why would you like to own a dog? Why would you choose, when there is so much to choose from? Why would you choose a dog that is so almost deliberately aggressive or obnoxious, whatever words you prefer. But the phrase there, that the dogs would be taken away and destroyed, I'm afraid I'm struggling with that a bit.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 18 minutes after 12. It's a strange one, this. I don't disapprove of the decision particularly, but I do balk at the idea of family pets being taken away and destroyed, but not as much as I balk at the recurring stories of humans being attacked by dogs, and the percentage of these attacks undertaken by this particular breed of dog is stunning. The problem you then have when you listen to Rishi Sunak's announcement on the issue of XL bullies earlier today is that can I say the breed? Because the first thing we've got to do is define the breed in law. So how can you tell me that 80% of these attacks have been undertaken by a dog whose breed hasn't been defined yet? I'm just a bit confused, but I'm sure you're not. And then a simple question, much simpler than we usually ask actually, but it's 12:20 on Friday. Is this the right decision? Is this the right decision? 0345 6060 973. John's in Glasgow. John, what can you tell us?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
So the breed is defined just now as the pit bull is a type of dog. So under the 91 Act, it's a pit bull type, which is not a specific breed. So in the UK, the Kennel Club recognise breeds as certain breeds. So a Cocker Spaniel or a German Shepherd.
So the Kennel Club is in charge of that?
Yes. Now, the American Pit Bull Terrier, which was banned under the 91 Act, wasn't registered or wasn't recognised by the British Kennel Club. So it was then a type, and the Pit Bull type can go from 20 kilos up to round about, starting to get about 35 or 40.
So what are the defining characteristics? In what circumstances would you tell someone who thought they owned a Pit Bull Terrier that they didn't?
So just now there's experts that then take measurements, and it's specific ratios of skull to muzzle, limb length to the length of the dog's body.
Oh, okay. So that's like what you see the judges do at a dog show.
Yeah. So that's what experts will say, that the dog is a pit bull type based on those measurements. Now, the problem with that is that you could cross a Labrador and a boxer and have something which physically resembles
but doesn't have any pit bull genes.
Yeah. So that's a big problem. That's why the legislation's flawed. So if they're going to define the XL bully, now I could see an XL bully and look at it and say, yeah, that dog's an XL bully.
Yeah.
But somebody might then say that it's a Mastiff, American Bulldog cross, with Staffordshire or something like that, which is how the breed, the XL bully came about. It's been a mishmash of a whole bunch of breeds.
Has it?
Yeah. So
I sense then that, I mean, it's not a binary question, is it? Good or bad, this decision. You might broadly understand the reasoning behind it, but the devil is in the detail, and the more detail I hear, the harder I think it's going to be to enact this kind of legislation.
Yeah, and we've seen over the last 30 years that, and this is across in the States and Canada as well, that breed-specific legislation hasn't reduced dog bites and dog attacks. So they went from, you rarely see, not as much as you maybe would have, but you tend not to see pit bull types. But they then just, the people that like these type of dogs then just gravitated into XL bullies. So if we ban an XL bully just now, it will just be in 30 years' time or in 20 years' time, we'll be having the same conversation about something else.
I want the most vicious looking and violent dog I can find. And I can't find this one because it's been banned and they've neutered all of them, so I'll find another one that will be legal until it isn't.
Yeah. And a lot of it is cultural. So the rap videos and, just as you were explaining about that dog actor, this stuff in popular culture then leads to young men usually going, I want a dog that looks like that because it gives me status and
So what do you? I mean, just in your personal view, what would you have done if you were Prime Minister? Just left it alone?
I don't know. So I'm a professional. I train dogs for a living, and for the last 15 years. And I don't know. I know that breed-specific legislation isn't the answer.
You do believe that?
I do think that,
because of the difficulties and the details you've just described. But then equally, there's a non-biological urgency here, because every time there's an attack and the politician hasn't done anything, it's a black mark, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, but I think it's about education of owners, but proper education of how do you train a dog properly, how to be a responsible dog owner, the training methods that are used, and on and on and on. And that's a massive topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
We would start to resolve it with education. So is that dog suited for your lifestyle? Can you provide that dog with its needs? So if you take one of these dogs and neglect it, give it no physical outlet for any of its energies or natural abilities like playing tug or searching for toys and things like that, the dog might just be bored out of its mind, so then creates its own.
So this is going to be tricky. This is probably the beginning of a new story rather than the end of the last one. Thank you, John. That's right. Oh, and would it involve, outlawing the breed if they do somehow define it, and the dogs that fall into that criteria, your reasonable quibbles about why it would be imperfect notwithstanding, do they then just get taken away and destroyed?
So I was a police officer before, so I learned the legislation.
Were you in the dogs? Were you a dog handler in the force?
No.
Okay.
Everybody asks that.
Well, it seemed a logical progression. But sorry,
I know.
for being so boring, John. I'm sorry, my questions are so predictable, mate.
No, not at all.
Go on.
So it used to be, certainly under the 91 legislation with the original, so there was 4 breeds that were outlawed. There was only 2 of the breeds there was no examples of those dogs in the country anyway. And the Japanese Tosa dog, there was 1 which was in the country that was like 14 years old or something.
Yeah.
So it was mainly the pit bulls, and what they did with them, they had to be muzzled and neutered and leashed in public. And the other part from that was that they were incapable of being further rehomed.
Right.
So if you had to rehome your dog, rescues couldn't accept them. They couldn't then rehome them. You couldn't pass it to your friend if you were ill. Your circumstances changed. So at the time, those dogs weren't destroyed, but they basically just had to remain in the home that they were. But it didn't work, and it didn't work because we see what has happened.
No, I hear you. Thank you, mate. That was really, really helpful. Actually, one texter, my sister actually, points out that insurance companies seem to have figured out how to define breeds, because there'll be some breeds that you can't get pet insurance for.
Yeah.
So but it will be imperfect, as you say. 12:25 is the time. So XL Bully owners possibly not yet. Not quite in the zone I thought they might be in terms of concern or fear. But the broader question, of course. Listen, I'm discombobulated by use of the word destroyed, because it's we usually say put down, don't we? Which sounds somehow more manageable. But that's just me being silly. You're either in favour of this or you're not. And I'm thinking of a weapon, I'm in favour of gun control. Therefore, I'm in favour of dangerous dog control. But then you open the door to all the other points about, well, all dogs are potentially dangerous, and why are you punishing completely innocent animals for the behaviour of badly trained ones? From John to Josh, from Glasgow to Liverpool. Josh, what would you like to say?
Well, hi, James, first
Hello,
time caller. First time calling into any radio station, so
welcome.
Thank you.
There's a few today. Crikey, must be doing something right.
It's the dogs. I'm a very passionate dog owner.
Yeah.
I've shown Tibetan Mastiffs. If you want to have a look at one of them, they are massive dogs.
Right.
60 odd kilos for a female. I currently own two American Akitas, which were Akitas that were saved by the US, bred with German Shepherds. They're very big dogs. They look intimidating, but if they're trained properly, they're soft as anything.
Okay.
And if they're trained properly, they are also police dogs.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I don't think banning a dog breed really saves anyone, because it's not the dog that's done. It's conditioned that way.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, and I understand the point, and I think I'd need to see a little bit more of the Canadian statistics on what happens when they are banned, because you are drawn to dogs that are what's the word you'd use?
Well, I'm a 6'6" guy.
Yeah.
I can't exactly walk around with a little teacup chihuahua,
Of course
can I?
you can. Don't be daft.
No, I stand on the damn thing by accident.
Just shush. Of course you can. I've got a little cavapoo. I've got a little cavapoo at home. Looks like a teddy bear. I'm not 6'6". I'm not 6'6", but I'm as tough as old boots, mate.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is, for the safety of the animal, I need something that can tell me.
Yeah, but there's a lot of difference between a tiny little chihuahua and a 60-kilo hound.
I'd more.
So you are drawn to enormous dogs.
I like a big fluffy dog.
Yeah, I get that, and
sorry.
That's all right. No, you carry on.
It's just, where do you draw the line?
That's
it'll
the
go
point.
From,
yeah.
Labradors a couple of years ago were responsible for more dog attacks than any other dogs.
Yes.
Just that they weren't as gruesome. And I feel really sorry, but there are certain people. I don't leave my two dogs alone with my children. I'm always there with my two dogs. I don't leave them alone. As much as I trust them, and as much as they wouldn't harm a hair on his head.
You can never be 100% certain of anything. Are you? I mean, none of your dogs are banned or facing bans.
No, but they're big.
No, I know, but the reason why they're not is because certain breeds, like certain breeds are good at catching rats. Certain breeds have a higher propensity to attack humans. They just do.
Staffordshire Bull Terriers, which are one of the most common dog attack dogs.
They're not banned.
They're not banned.
No.
But the scary part about one of them is, you go back 50 years, Staffordshire Bull Terriers were considered a nanny dog, but then people started breeding Jack Russell Terriers into them.
To increase their aggression.
Their prey drive.
Yes.
A Jack Russell Terrier that's working on a farm with 5 of them will kill 300-400 rats a night. That's a lot of prey drive to then put into an animal with the toolkit of a pit bull.
I understand everything you're saying. I think the only point where we diverge, and I'm not strong on this, to my own surprise, actually, Josh, I thought I'd have much more pungent opinions. The point where we diverge is the graph. So there is a graph of what you might simply call propensity to violence, and then then there is another graph, which is where you started this call, which is weight or size. And it doesn't seem to me, and the problem is, of course, that your dogs will definitely be above the threshold on weight and size, but they wouldn't be above the threshold on propensity to violence against humans. But what's unfair,
if trained correctly,
then that's where it becomes a bit arbitrary, isn't it? Because any dog, even your dogs, if they were brutalised and half-starved,
they'd be vicious as anything. No, I completely agree.
Yeah,
what I would say is, instead of punishing the dog breed and like certain dogs that have been abused cannot be saved, and euthanizing them humanely is the only way.
But on this one, there's going to be dogs who've never put a paw wrong, who could be facing a death penalty, couldn't they? Potentially.
Exactly, and it's the same way they treat guns. People can still own guns in this country, but there's licensing and training involved. License and train people to own the big dogs, and it'll still allow people to have them, and it'll still allow the breed to survive, and it'll stop the thugs on the road, on the side of the street, that are getting them because they want status, getting them easily.
Yeah, no, we shall see. I mean, again, it's too early to criticise anything the government has done, except perhaps move a little bit clumsily into a much more complicated space than they realise, but it doesn't mean that they won't be able to accommodate all of the points that you and John have already made. It's 12:31. My friend Scott's been in touch to say, I preferred it when you'd call the owners of dangerous dogs inadequate and then wait for the phones to start ringing with people saying that their pit bull Hitler wouldn't hurt a fly. I do remember that. You make it sound so cynical, Scott. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
12:35 is the time. John helped, but how are they going to define an XL bully? That's a question that demands a degree of knowledge of matters canine, and possibly not as much knowledge of matters canine, but it would help to answer the question of whether or not Rishi Sunak has he's done the right thing politically. Something must be done. in some circumstances, the worst thing you can do when everyone's thumping the table, shouting something must be done, is do something. You end up almost certainly doing the wrong thing or overreacting. But I think this growing clamour, or the growing number of cases, there's been an arrest, I think I mentioned to you, over the attack that happened in Warsaw on Thursday afternoon. It's been confirmed today that the victim subsequently died. But I mean, they are strange conversations, because at one extreme you ban all dogs, and at the other extreme you have people allowed to keep, I don't know, wolves as pets, and then somewhere in between there is a line, and on one side of it you can keep your dog and on the other side you can't. And I've never had this before. I always used to conduct these conversations from a very different angle, but I don't quite understand how you draw that line. Steve's in Nottingham. Steve, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. There's been such good information, and the debate's really interesting. It's made me change my approach of what I wanted to say about 10 times.
Crikey. Fair enough.
So,
good.
yeah, so I only know from experience. I own an XL Bully.
Right.
And, you know, like, so I guess when I'm walking up the park or I'm going for a run with him, it's terror on people's faces. They think they're going to attack him. And actually, it's every dog that he approaches, if they don't like him, they'll bite at him and start attacking him. But I never report it. It's not for me to. It comes expected that my dog can take it, because the way he looks, he should be getting set upon, and I'll let's just move away, sort of thing.
So you're talking about the irresponsibility of other owners, really?
Absolutely, and
fair
it's
enough.
always from it's always from quote unquote lesser breeds that shouldn't be. You know, like someone mentioned a poodle or whatever.
Yeah.
The amount of bites and attacks I've heard from people that have had that from poodles. I know it might not be life-threatening, but
that is pertinent. That is pertinent, but it can still hurt. Let me back up a little bit, because I am interested in the impulse. Because when you say I can see the terror on everybody's face when I'm walking him.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure I want to see terror on everybody's face.
Me neither.
Well, then why did you pick that particular breed of dog then?
So. Well, first of all, it's other people's ignorance, isn't it? So they don't know the dog.
Well, but we're not. We're talking
about me. I'm an 18-stone.
Fair enough. But there are a lot of dogs you could have chosen that wouldn't have. And part of the reason the terror is there is because of all the stories about attacks. So it's not just ignorance; it could actually be knowledge that is making them spooked.
So what's interesting? That's the circle, isn't it? So you get a story, then the story's a story, then that dog's going to look at someone a certain way, and then it correlates with the story they've
Yes,
just
I think
heard,
that's true. There's an element of
him.
chicken and egg here, isn't there? An element of chicken and egg. If we hadn't read all the stories, then we wouldn't be as scared of the dog. But then equally, if the dog hadn't got a propensity for attacking humans, we wouldn't have read all the stories. And of course, it's the size of the dog that makes the attacks more dangerous and more and therefore more newsworthy.
That was going to come on to my other thing. So my dog is powerful, but I chose this particular breed. I had to put my dog down, which was a staff prior to him.
Right.
I had to put him down. He got cancer of the nose, actually. He was during lockdown. Yeah, it was awful. Yeah. So I wanted to bring another family dog into my home, and like someone else mentioned, they're made up of 5. The lineage is made up of 5 different bulldog, mastiff, etc., etc., etc. And I can honestly say, so when I brought them in, I got 3 cats. I had chickens at the time. He didn't eat them, by the way. But I had chickens at the time. And, you know, it took 18 months. He's the hardest dog to break. It took 18 months to break this dog.
Right.
He understood, you know, the pack, the levels, obedience, recall. So there is potential, if they're not raised right, there is potential, you can see it, that they want to be dominant, because that's, I guess, what they're bred for, and all of them breeds combined, that's what they are. So there's definitely a degree that if these aren't handled correctly, they will go off on the other way, or do what dogs do and be pack leader or be dominant.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And what makes it different is the size. So I've got these 2 graphs in my head. One is propensity to violence, which you've referred to with other dogs, but because they're not as big, that violence is not as significant. It's not as serious. How easy is it going to be to define the breed, Steve, do you think?
Well, I'm certainly not going to give them any ideas on radio, but that is definitely it's going to be whatever that lineage it leans towards.
But then you can have different mixes of that lineage, and are any of those 5 breeds banned already themselves?
Well, Pitt is, so Pitt's in there.
Right. So there will be some.
But again, it depends of where it leans to.
Yeah.
And also, this is something else I was going to say. So he mentioned the XL Bully. Well, XL Bully is just the exaggerated version of what the Bully is anyway. So they could ban the XL Bully, which can be an absolute monster in terms of weight and size.
How big is yours?
So he's 40 kg.
40 kilos. Okay. So actually, the lad in Liverpool's dogs were bigger, weren't they? But just not banned.
There you go.
It is. It's a tough one. Well, are you worried? I mean, what will you do? Will you go on the run?
Yeah, I'm going to be really conspicuous with my XL Bully.
18 stone Steve and his XL Bully. Going like Daniel Khalif, mate. Like Daniel Khalif trying to go undercover and stay off the road. Be like the fugitive, but with a 40-kilo dog.
Yeah, have you seen this man? Everyone just looks out the window and sort of points. Oh, he's over there, you know.
What are you? I mean, are you a bit worried? I mean, because it does sound.
So look, you said something earlier. So you said the different, destroyed and put down. Well, put down's what you tell your kid for animal hospital, and he needs to go to a better place, so we have to be kinder. But ultimately, if they decide that this is what they're going to do, where have we heard that before? And they're going to steamroll, and they're going to start saying that's what they're going to do. They're going to rip and take and destroy.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to do. That's what they're going to aim to do. And he wants to be seen to be doing something.
But what about? I mean, just in terms of like not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you have to muzzle your dog whenever he's out in public and neuter him, would you be all right with that?
I refuse to. The reason being is I would do, and the reason being is because if I was worried that my dog was okay in any way, he wouldn't be around my kids.
Yeah,
he'd be taking a walk up the woods with me. I wouldn't have that.
Yeah.
So my dog has to be 100% compliant and 100% integrated and trained in order for me to have. So the other guy said you can't trust them 100%. I get that. I do get that. You should always be mindful.
Yes.
But if I didn't trust my dog 100%, why would I have him in the first place? I don't get that.
I hear you. No, I hear you. I mean, I hope it doesn't come to that, but I do understand where you are coming from. And as I've said, this conversation, part of the reason why you've changed your mind while you were waiting to come on is because we're conducting it in quite a nuanced way. And the problem perhaps will prove to be that there's nothing nuanced about what Rishi Sunak has announced, or he's left himself in a position where there wouldn't be much room for manoeuvre. John writes, you're quite right that when everyone is calling for action, sometimes you're better off. The best move is not to take action at all. When the dangerous dogs legislation was introduced in 1991, so that was under John Major, it was widely criticised, and then reaction led to very many appeals, and nobody really knew what was going on. And you can see why. It's hard to define, it's hard to ban, it's hard to police, and it's hard to determine. Steve, thank you, mate. Jed's in Ormskirk. Jed, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say I've been a paramedic for 28 years, and I've attended numerous dog attacks.
Have you?
Ranging various breeds.
Is it monthly? I mean, I know it's not going to be completely regular, but is it a monthly occurrence? Is it a weekly occurrence? How often would a paramedic's services be required in a dog attack?
I would probably say daily to weekly.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Varying from, sort of minor facial injuries of a little, yappy dog has bitten some.
Right, you are, yeah. Tetanus and stuff.
They don't know. But I mean, what I wanted to sort of kind of focus on was I've actually had personal experience of devastating dog attacks.
Yeah.
Quite widely reported.
Right.
Devastating dog attacks.
The worst result.
If people could see what myself and my colleagues have seen when we attend these most devastating of the dog attacks,
yes,
it would completely change people's perspective on stuff. I totally understand the idea that it's owners versus animal or whichever, but these dogs are. The weight of them, the power that they have, they're akin to, a leopard or whatever it be. I mean, a 17-stone XL bully.
No one would argue that you should be able to keep that on a lead and take it for a walk. But where do you draw the line, though, Jed? Because it can't just be weight, because then you've got St. Bernards and, Old English sheepdogs.
I think what we're discussing now is like there does seem to be a little bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? There's an association with this particular breed with fatal dog attacks versus, an Irish red setter.
Yes, but the lads we've spoken to haven't been part of that phenomenon. And they are owners of XL bullies, and they've all sounded pretty well. I mean,
I understand that. I do. I get that. I really, really do.
But if I'd seen what you'd seen, I'd just think, all right, it's a sad business, but it's just not a risk worth taking. Having this dog in there.
Why do they have to have something which is potentially capable of killing someone? Why do they have to own a dog which could, if it goes off on one or is mistreated or whatever it be, why do they have to own a dog that is capable of that? I just don't get that.
I used to do that question as the phone-in on issues like this. It was the only question I ever asked, and I still don't really know, because some people like the look, some people like the it's when you go to a dog show and they're measuring all the bit. People are really... Are you a dog man? Are you into dogs yourself?
No.
No, you see, I get it now. I wasn't a dog owner when I used to ask that question on the radio. They don't float my boat, but I have an understanding of why they float other people's boats that doesn't extend to, being a penis extension or being a weapon of intimidation. There is other stuff going on within the aesthetics of it.
No, I totally understand that. I mean, I'm an animal lover. I've never owned a dog personally.
No. But it is the question. If you bred out the breeds of dog that have a particular capability, stroke propensity for attacking humans, then the world would probably be a better place. But people who own and love these dogs would not agree with that. Their lives, their worlds would be measurably diminished. Jed, thank you, mate. I'm sorry, and I'm glad you rang in, because I think it's all very well being nuanced and balanced, but the important reminder of the people who have to deal with the aftermath of these attacks is a crucial part of the conversation, I think.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
12:51 is the time. A little word on this week's Full Disclosure, just in case you can't bear the thought of a weekend without me. Clive Myrie, who's written a beautiful book called Everything is Everything, and has written a remarkable memoir, actually. It wasn't intended to be when he sat down to write it, but ended up being a sort of love letter to the Windrush generation, but very much from the perspective of both observer, as you'd expect from one of the finest foreign correspondents in the business, and participant. Began life in Bolton, of Jamaican extraction, and ended up, of course, at the very top of the media game, and the lessons he's learnt along the way. That there's a sort of bookending to it as well. It's just a really lovely book, but it's a very special interview, a very, very enjoyable interview, and one that I know I always recommend, Full Disclosure, but that's because we choose our guests quite carefully. And very, 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 very rarely do we regret our choice of guest. In fact, we've never really regretted it. But there was one interview I wasn't very pleased. Oh, I've done it again. Every time I say, there was one Full Disclosure interview out of the 100 that we've done or more, people start texting me with the one I thought it was, and I get really insecure because I go, no, not that one. I thought that one was really... No, not that one either. I thought that one was really good. So do not text me now with suggestions as to which interview it is I'm thinking about whenever I say that there was one I wasn't very pleased with. It just wasn't as good or as much fun as I thought it was going to be. 12:53 is the time. Back to the dogs. Victoria's in Edinburgh. Victoria, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I wanted to weigh in a little bit on the sort of how we define a breed.
Yes.
So my background, I'm an animal geneticist. So genetics of animals is what I do for a living.
I worked that out when you said you were an animal geneticist. Well, I thought to myself, genetics of animals is what she does for a living, Victoria.
Okay. So it's something that gets brought up a lot when people talk about how the morphology of the morphology metrics for the Dangerous Dogs Act are, obviously quite flawed, as been discussed already. People bring up genetics as a way of, can we test to see whether or not they are a breed of interest, and therefore, decide.
Yes, like a DNA type test.
Yeah, essentially. But breeds are actually a really complex thing in animals. Yeah. As some of your other callers have already mentioned, that different breeds can make up the kind of genetic history of another breed. So some breeds influence another breed quite a lot.
Got it.
And depending on how, whether or not it's what we call a closed breed, i.e. they only breed with other animals within the same breed, or whether they're an open breed where they've, maybe there's crossbred animals that have come into that. It can be really hard to distinguish them. And on top of that, there's this effect where we line breed for animals within certain breeds as well. So you might hear people talking about like working lines of dogs, where, dogs that have been bred specifically for a job. So, collies, spaniels, Labradors, those sorts of breeds, if they've been bred for their particular job, people quite often advise you not to pick a working line one for a pet, because the traits that they have are different. So within a breed, you can have a lot of genetic variation dependent on this sort of line breeding phenomenon. So, you struggle to determine between breeds, and sometimes those lines within breeds can actually be more distinct from each other than the breeds themselves. So it makes it really difficult. And population genetics, it's a really interesting area to work in, but it can be really, really difficult to
what do you think they'll do?
Determine them.
What do you think they'll do?
Honestly, I don't know how they're going to do it.
Right.
I can't think of a way that is.
You'd think they might have spoken to an animal geneticist before making the announcement, wouldn't you, Victoria? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, at least that route I really don't think is going to work. And we know morphology doesn't work. And, other than just eyeballing them, how do you know? And
well, I'm just saying, it's just on the discretion of some judge saying that's one that isn't. That one goes, that one doesn't.
If that judge isn't an expert in all the various breeds of dogs, then how can they do it? I mean, legally, how can you do that? It just is, there's no evidence for it, and it makes it, to me, completely unworkable.
Well, that was the fear. It is interesting to have it confirmed from a position of such knowledge, such scientific understanding, because of all the variables in place, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, it's without, and I mean, I'm not aware of any population genetic studies in XL bullies at the moment. I don't mean there aren't any, but I'm not.
So there wouldn't be a template to compare them to yet, anyway. But it could. No, well, thank you. I mean that. So, what does your day job involve? What do you do? What are you working on today, if you don't mind me asking?
I actually at the moment I'm doing a little bit of writing on a paper on inbreeding in horses and how it can lead to susceptibility to certain diseases, and therefore that kind of effect of certain lines can lead to susceptibility to disease that isn't just a particular, you have a mutation and it causes it. It's a collection of different genetic variants across a whole genome that can add up to a risk profile.
So like an inherited propensity then, as it were?
Yeah.
Crikey.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Well, blimey, your job's a lot more important than mine.
Well, I mean, it depends. It depends on
I suppose it does. But we've joined forces, I think, quite brilliantly today, Victoria, to get the information out there. I'm very grateful to you. Crikey.
No, thank you for having me on.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for calling. It's coming up to 12:58. I haven't really got time for Julia in wool. But I mean, Julia, I'm sorry. I feel bad when there's someone hanging on the end. But as we get to the end of the programme, can you say anything of interest in 20 seconds? I struggle.
So I was just going to say that we need to regulate dog trainers, and then we can make licensing of owning dogs more substantial, so that if we had regulation of how dogs should be trained, and dog trainers were regulated, because anyone can be a dog trainer, but then we could actually make, you have to do a dog training course to actually own a dog, and then that can all come into the licensing, and then it's
I accept that. I don't think I need to do a dog training course to own my little dog, and you'd still have the problem of where do you draw the line for the dogs that you do need unless you want to insist that everyone gets trained before they're allowed to own. I could live with that, but I just think it'd be quite hard to introduce. Thank you, Julia. I warned you I was short of time. If you missed any of today's shows, you can, or to any show ever, you can listen back on catch up on Global Player, where you can rewind live radio or enjoy the whole show podcast. You'll also find all our shows there, all LBC shows, as well as the world's biggest podcast. Full disclosure this week with the rather splendid Clive Myrie. I waited all the way to the end of the interview until I brought up my glorious victory on Celebrity Mastermind. That took some work, I can tell you. So do rewind live radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now in for Sheila, it's Sangeeta Maiska.
Thank you, James. Is your region experiencing a youth brain drain? 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 A youth.